The board snapped beneath my 14-year-old daughter before I could reach her. Eden vanished through the maintenance platform, clutching her dead father's brass plaque, struck the rocks below, and screamed once. The safety barrier had been moved for a sponsor's camera. My sister's new logo waited where Nolan's name had hung, while my parents smiled for donors. I dropped beside the broken edge and called Eden's name. They thought the plaque was scrap metal. The next time my mother saw it, it would be tied beneath a red bow with a question their branding could not answer. I hope you are doing well tonight. Stay with Eden and me to see what happened after that platform broke, and subscribe to Stories by Night so you do not miss the rest of our story. 6 hours earlier, Eden and I drove into Pineglass Mountain Resort, beneath an archway bearing her father's name. The Courage Weekend was still advertised as a family camping program, although Pineglass had built cabins and sponsor spaces around the original tent meadow. Families arrived with sleeping bags and outdoor gear for guided camp activities, while donors were directed toward the resort facilities. Nolan Hollis Courage Weekend appeared in white lettering across a canvas banner stretched between two lodge buildings. Smaller signs pointed guests toward the pool, sponsor lounge, photography terrace, VIP cabins, and North Lookout. Every arrow carried a mountain-shaped logo my sister had designed around Nolan's initials. Eden lowered the window and stared at a row of employees unloading boxes of insulated cups. "My dad hated travel mugs," she said. "He hated lids that leaked. He said coffee tasted like plastic in those." I glanced at the cups as we passed. Nolan's signature had been printed beneath a slogan he had never written. "Find your courage outdoors." He also hated slogans, Eden said. "I know." She raised the old film camera resting in her lap and looked through the viewfinder without taking a picture. It had belonged to Nolan. The leather around the body had worn pale where his thumb used to rest. My parents had started the children's program after Nolan died in 2020. Volunteers took grieving children on short hikes, taught them to read maps, and used his photographs and lesson plans to fund the outings. I approved a limited license while I was still too raw to examine every detail, trusting my mother's promise to protect what he built. 5 years later, his name covered towels, cabin doors, water bottles, and a temporary bar beside the pool. Gordon met us outside the lodge and introduced me to two sponsors as Nolan's widow and the person who still technically signed off on the archive. When I said I mostly stayed out of their way, he laughed. Exactly why the partnership works. I smiled with everyone else. Eden did not. She lifted the camera and photographed the banner above us. My mother appeared before anyone could ask why. Loretta wore white hiking pants and a pale blue blouse that looked designed for a camera rather than a trail. She embraced me, then held Eden by the shoulders. 14, she said. Nolan would be so proud of the young woman you have become. Eden stepped back before Loretta could turn the embrace toward the sponsor photographer. Happy birthday for last month, Loretta added. You called me and sent that beautiful leather journal. It had the foundation logo on every page. Loretta's smile tightened. Because it was made especially for you. Sabrina crossed the lodge entrance with 3 assistants following her. My younger sister wore a headset, carried 2 phones, and moved as if every person within 50 feet had been placed there for her convenience. There she is, she said when she saw Eden. Our missing final piece. I'm not a piece, Eden replied. Sabrina either did not hear or chose not to. She opened a digital presentation on one phone and turned the screen toward us. A photograph of Eden, at age 8, appeared beside a recent school picture. Between them, a trail faded into sunrise. Across the center were the words, "The daughter he left behind, returns to his trail." Please don't start this again. Eden looked at me. 6 months earlier, Sabrina had invited us to a foundation live stream and promised Eden only 2 questions. Once the countdown began, a producer handed her a card that read, "Dad's legacy taught me that grief can become strength," then asked her to stare at Nolan's photograph and look more emotional. Eden removed her microphone and walked out. Sabrina later told our parents She had created a scene because the attention was not centered on her. I said Sabrina should have listened, then still asked Eden to apologize for leaving without warning. Standing outside the lodge, I repeated the same mistake. Sabrina didn't mean Dad chose to leave, I said. Eden removed her microphone. I said I don't want to do this. She walked out while the live stream countdown screen was still running. By that evening, Sabrina had told our parents Eden had created a scene because the attention was not centered on her. Loretta said teenagers often use discomfort as a way to control a room. Gordon said Eden needed to learn that public projects required cooperation. I had told Eden that Sabrina should have listened. Then I had asked her to apologize for leaving without warning. Standing outside the lodge, I saw the memory move across my daughter's face. Sabrina didn't mean Dad chose to leave, I said. We adjusted the schedule, Daniel said. Sabrina had replaced the quiet hour with sponsor interviews and a content walk. Eden folded Nolan's map. It was the only part Dad said we weren't allowed to improve. I pulled her aside and said the weekend mattered to Grandma. It mattered when Dad did it without cameras, she replied. When I claimed to understand, she said, No, you understand them. Loretta was greeting donors beneath Nolan's face. The program had helped real children, and I had used that good work to excuse every compromise around it. We adjusted the schedule, Daniel said. What does adjusted mean? Sabrina added sponsor interviews and a content walk. So it's gone. Only for this preview. Eden folded the map. It was the only part Dad said we weren't allowed to improve. Daniel looked toward Sabrina. She was already answering another call. I took Eden aside. This is an important weekend for Grandma. It was important when Dad did it without cameras. I understand. No, you understand them. The words were quiet enough that no one else heard. I looked toward Loretta. She was introducing donors beneath a banner printed with my husband's face. For 5 years, I had told myself the foundation helped children. That remained true. Dozens of families had attended free programs. Volunteers had done good work. Nolan's photographs had reached people he would never meet. I had used that good work to excuse every compromise made around it. I'm asking you not to fight with them today, I said. Eden placed the film camera strap around her neck. I wasn't fighting. By early afternoon, clouds had begun building above the western ridge. The sponsor group moved toward North Lookout for photographs, before the usual mountain storms arrived. The overlook stood above a steep wooded slope, with an upper platform projecting toward the valley, and a lower stone terrace set farther back. Nolan had taught his first organized children's workshop there years before the resort expanded. A maintenance worker had placed a yellow barrier across a narrow service entrance behind the upper platform. A laminated notice hung from it. Maintenance access closed. The worker was explaining something to Gordon when we arrived. The support replacement isn't complete, he said. The public deck is stable, but nobody should use the rear access until inspection. Gordon looked through the sponsor photographer's camera angle. The barrier is directly behind the interview mark. I can move the mark. We have already lit this position. The rear access still needs to stay blocked. I'm not asking you to open it. Move the barrier 6 feet left so it isn't in the shot. The worker hesitated. Gordon lowered his voice. We have county review next week. Nobody is going back there today. The worker lifted one end of the barrier and shifted it beside a utility cabinet. The service entrance was no longer blocked from the direction of the platform. Eden raised her camera. The shutter clicked. What are you photographing? I asked. The thing they'll say wasn't there. I should have asked what she meant. Sabrina called for 2 resort employees to bring tools. She pointed toward the brass plaque fastened to a wooden display near the platform entrance. Nolan Hollis, listen before you lead. The plaque had been installed after Nolan's death. Eden had chosen the final line from one of his notebooks. We need this off before the wide shot, Sabrina said. One employee examined the screws. The replacement sign isn't permanent yet. It only needs to stay up through the preview. They removed the plaque and carried it toward a service cart. Behind it, another worker positioned a polished sign bearing the Weller Legacy Experiences logo. The new sign was larger. It covered the faded outline where Nolan's plaque had been. Eden took another photograph. Sabrina noticed. Please don't document every unfinished detail like it's a crime scene. Where are you putting Dad's plaque? Storage. The employee rested it beside the cart. That isn't storage, Eden said. We are busy. Is it coming back after the preview? Sabrina checked her phone. We'll decide what fits the new design. It has his name on it. So does half the resort. That was the original one. Sabrina turned to the employee. Leave it there. We'll dump it after the preview. Eden lifted the camera once more. The shutter clicked. I stepped between them. Sabrina, don't call it trash in front of her. I said we would decide later. You said dump it. Because I am managing 15 moving pieces, and your daughter is treating a design update like a funeral. Loretta called my name from the terrace. A donor from Denver wanted to meet Nolan's widow before the group photograph. My mother waved me over with an urgency that made refusal feel like public sabotage. I looked at Eden. Stay here. I'll be back in 2 minutes. She stared at the plaque beside the service cart. Mara, Loretta called again. I went. That was the choice I would replay more than the sound of the wood breaking. I left my daughter beside the thing she believed was about to be thrown away because I did not want to embarrass my mother in front of a donor. Loretta placed me between two sponsor representatives. Someone handed me a reusable bottle bearing Nolan's signature. The photographer asked us to move closer together. Behind him, I saw Eden walking toward the service cart. The yellow barrier no longer stood across the rear entrance. Eden, I called. She did not hear me over Sabrina's microphone test. Eden set her camera on a bench and stepped onto the maintenance walkway. The brass plaque leaned just beyond the first support beam. She reached for it with both hands. A low crack cut through the sponsor music. The boards tilted beneath her. Eden! She turned toward my voice. The support gave way. She disappeared through the platform, with the plaque against her chest. Her body struck the slope below, then stopped between two rocks. For 1 second, no one moved. Then I ran. I dropped to my knees at the broken edge. Eden lay 20 feet below, twisted on her side. The plaque had fallen beside her. Her left arm rested at an angle that made my stomach turn. Don't move, I shouted. Eden, look at me. Her eyes opened. Mom, I'm here. It hurts, I know. Help is coming. Someone called Resort Emergency Services. The maintenance worker ran for the rescue equipment. Gordon kept repeating that the rear access had not been open. Eden tried to lift her head. Don't move, baby. The sign. Forget the sign. They were throwing him away. Her voice broke on the last word. Rescuers reached her at 2:35. They stabilized her neck, examined her abdomen, and called for air transport because the slope made ground evacuation slow, and her blood pressure was falling. A medic removed the plaque from beside her and wrapped it before placing it with her belongings. As they lifted Eden into the rescue basket, she kept repeating one sentence. Don't let them throw it away. At 2:55, the helicopter rose above Pineglass Mountain. I climbed in beside my daughter. Before the door closed, I looked down at my parents and Sabrina. Follow us, I shouted. Drive to the hospital. Gordon pointed toward the sponsor group. The helicopter is Mountain Protocol. We'll come when the preview is stable. She may be bleeding internally. Loretta pressed one hand to her chest. Mara, don't say that in front of everyone. Come with us. We cannot abandon hundreds of guests because Eden went into a restricted area. The door closed before I could answer. The flight to Denver took 38 minutes. Eden's blood pressure dropped twice. She stared at the ceiling and asked whether the plaque had come with us. I told her it was safe. I did not know where it was, but the medic had promised it would follow her belongings. At the trauma center, a team moved her through scans and examinations so quickly that I lost track of individual faces. Dr. Helen Park introduced herself as the trauma surgeon leading Eden's care. At 3:52, Dr. Park told me Eden had severe internal bleeding and falling blood pressure. The surgical team was preparing the operating room. I sent one message to my mother, father, and sister. Eden is bleeding internally. Her blood pressure is dropping. They are taking her into emergency surgery now. Please come to the hospital. At 3:54, the read receipts appeared beneath all three names. No one replied. At 4:07, as nurses pushed Eden toward the operating room doors, my phone lit up again. Sabrina had posted a photograph taken beside the pool to the public Weller event story. She later claimed she had meant to send it only to a private sponsor thread, but the screenshot showed the public account. She stood between my parents, all three of them raising cocktails beneath a banner bearing Nolan's name. Behind the trees, the helicopter carrying Eden away from them was visible in the sky. The caption said, "Finally enjoying ourselves without that attention, seeking brat." At 4:10, the operating room doors closed behind my daughter. I looked at the three red receipts again. They had not misunderstood how badly Eden was hurt. They had read my message first. The operating room doors stayed closed after my parents read that Eden was bleeding internally, and my sister called her an attention-seeking brat. I stood beneath the red light above those doors, with my phone in one hand and the surgical consent form trembling in the other. Minutes earlier, Dr. Helen Park had shown me the scans on a monitor outside the trauma bay. A deep tear ran through Eden's spleen. Blood had collected inside her abdomen, and her pressure kept falling despite fluids and the first unit of blood. Dr. Park said the injury might normally be watched if a patient remained stable. Eden was not stable. "We need to open her abdomen and control the bleeding," she said. "We will preserve as much splenic function as we safely can, but stopping the hemorrhage comes first." She pointed to the fracture through Eden's pelvic ring. It was stable enough that surgery was not immediately required, but Eden would not be allowed to put weight on her legs for weeks. Her left wrist was broken and would need to be set. The concussion meant they would also monitor her neurological responses as soon as the anesthesia wore off. I tried to hold all of it at once. Internal bleeding, pelvic fracture, broken wrist, brain rest, weeks without standing. Is she going to live? Dr. Park did not answer with the kind of certainty frightened parents beg doctors to manufacture. "We are taking her in because this gives her the best chance." A nurse turned the form toward me and marked the places requiring my signature. There was a line for the patient's legal guardian, and another for a second authorized adult if available. The second line remained empty. I signed alone. When the doors closed, I read Sabrina's caption again. The photograph had been taken before the helicopter lifted away from Pine Glass. My parents were seated beneath a cream umbrella. Gordon had one arm resting across the back of Loretta's chair. Sabrina leaned between them, holding her cocktail toward the camera. Nolan's name appeared on the banner behind them. The helicopter was a small, dark shape above the trees. I enlarged the image until the words blurred. Then I took a screenshot, saved it, and placed my phone face down on the plastic chair beside me. For several minutes, I listened to the hospital around me. Wheels crossed the polished floor. An overhead speaker called a respiratory therapist. Somewhere beyond the waiting room, a child cried, while an adult repeated that everything would be all right. My phone vibrated against the chair. Loretta had sent a message. "We need a calm public update before donors start speculating. Please send one sentence we can use." A second message arrived from Gordon. "Do not mention sponsor filming or the platform preparation. The resort has an incident process. Let them handle facts before you create liability." Sabrina sent a longer message with a draft statement. During today's family preview, Eden entered a clearly restricted maintenance area, despite repeated instructions. She suffered injuries resulting from an unfortunate personal choice. Our family is supporting her recovery while continuing the charitable work she has always valued. I read the phrase twice. An unfortunate personal choice. Less than 2 hours earlier, Gordon had ordered the safety barrier moved because it spoiled a camera angle. Sabrina had ordered Nolan's plaque removed because it did not fit her new design. I had left Eden beside that plaque because my mother wanted me smiling for a sponsor. They were already building a version in which every adult disappeared from the cause, and Eden became the only person who had chosen anything. I did not answer. A hospital employee came through the waiting room, carrying a clear property bag and a longer package wrapped in a gray rescue blanket. She checked the name on my wristband before handing them to me. "These were transported with the flight crew," she said. "The resort safety coordinator confirmed the remaining items are being inventoried." Inside the property bag were Eden's jacket, one shoe, the leather case from Nolan's film camera, and the camera itself. The lens cap was missing. Dust filled the seam around the shutter button. A thin crack ran across one corner of the leather strap. The wrapped package held the brass plaque. One edge had folded inward when it struck the rocks. Dirt filled the engraved letters. A dark smear marked the lower corner before the rescue crew had covered it with gauze and plastic. I touched Nolan's name through the wrapping. I had spent 5 years softening every violation until the adults around Eden could remain comfortable. Sabrina's next message highlighted 3 words in her proposed statement. Clearly restricted area. I closed it and looked at the bent plaque. The red cord came back to me. Nolan wrapped photographic prints in brown paper and tied them with uneven red loops because he hated tape. The final print he gave Loretta showed children sitting quietly beside a mountain lake. When she asked why no one was smiling, he said, "Because they weren't there to perform for me." In his final year, he organized his archive with Miriam and left sealed instructions for the day people forgot where the boundaries were. One night, after treatment left him too weak to climb the stairs, I found him sitting at our dining table with 2 sealed envelopes and a shallow wooden box. "What is all this?" I asked. "Things Miriam keeps until they are needed." "Needed for what?" He rested one hand over the lid. "If people forget where the boundaries are." At the time, I thought he meant publishers, galleries, and businesses trying to use his photographs without permission. I kissed the top of his head and carried his tea to the sink. I did not ask whose names were on the envelopes. After he died, I signed the limited license allowing my parents' foundation to use selected photographs, lesson plans, the Nolan Hollis mark, and the Quiet Hour for nonprofit children's programs. I remained acting trustee. Miriam administered the files and carried out written instructions. The authority had always been mine, so had the responsibility. I called Miriam at 4:38. She answered on the second ring. "Mara? I need to know exactly what I can stop." She did not ask me to slow down. She heard enough in my voice to choose a different question. "Where are you?" "At the Children's Trauma Center. Eden is in surgery." There was a short silence. "What happened?" I gave her the facts I knew. Gordon had pressured an employee to move the barrier. Sabrina had removed Nolan's plaque and replaced it with a commercial logo. Eden had fallen while trying to retrieve the plaque. The sponsor presentation used Eden's image and the line about the daughter he left behind. My parents had stayed at Pineglass. Sabrina had posted the photograph after reading that Eden was being taken into surgery. Miriam asked me to forward nothing yet. "Tell me what you want to stop," she said. "I want them to stop using Eden. I want the commercial retreat separated from Nolan's work. I want them out of the archive until we know what they have taken." "You can issue an emergency suspension for a material breach," she said. "That is not the same as terminating the license tonight." "What does the suspension do?" "The digital archive sits on servers controlled by the trust. I can disable foundation and company access after receiving a written instruction from you. I can send a cease-use notice covering commercial promotion, merchandise, the registered marks, and material taken from the archive." "What about everything they have already printed?" "It will not vanish because you send an email. We can direct them to stop distribution and sale. If they comply, The material remains stored while the breach is reviewed. And the children's programs? The original license separates community education from commercial use. You can preserve current nonprofit activities during the cure period, as long as they stop using suspended materials and new promotion. How long do they have? 7 business days after service. To do what? End the sublicense, or any transfer to the commercial company. Stop using Eden. Suspend the campaign. Accept independent review of the program. The specific cure depends on what the documents show, but they have a chance to correct the breach before final termination. I looked at the plaque across my knees. And if they refuse, then the trust can terminate according to the agreement. The words sounded less dramatic than I expected. No single button would erase the resort signs. No email would empty a warehouse or force my mother out of her office. The agreement would place a choice in front of them: correct what they had done, or lose the permission that made it possible. Miriam continued. There is something else you need to understand before you instruct me. What? The $1,500 you receive each month is the fixed archive consultation fee Nolan approved in the original licensing arrangement. It is not a payment you can set for yourself, and I verify each monthly invoice. Once the license is suspended, that fee stops too. I knew the amount. It covered the lease on one of my printing machines and part of Eden's health insurance premium. Some months, it was the difference between paying myself and leaving the money in the shop. How soon? Immediately. I looked toward the operating room doors. What about the trust itself? Can it help with her bills? The trust instrument does not allow personal distributions. It preserves the archive and funds community grants. Nolan kept those purposes separate. He had done that because he never wanted Eden's medical care, education, or ordinary life made dependent on people using his name. I had once considered that protection. Now it felt like a cliff edge. If I act, I lose the payment while my shop costs, and her medical expenses are about to increase, I said. Yes. You are not going to tell me what to do. No. Did Nolan leave anything for this situation? Miriam did not answer immediately. He left a box under conditional delivery instructions, she said. I cannot tell you what is inside, material addressed to another person. As trustee, you can direct delivery if the license is suspended for a boundary violation. Who is it for? Loretta. The red cord returned to my mind. Deliver it. I need that instruction in writing with everything else. I opened my laptop on the low table beside the waiting room chair. My hands felt heavy on the keyboard. I wrote one email to Miriam. I instructed her to issue the emergency suspension under the license. I authorized her to disable Foundation, and Weller Legacy experiences access to every digital asset controlled by the trust. I directed her to serve written notice, requiring them to stop using the Nolan Hollis and the quiet hour marks in merchandise, paid promotion, and commercial retreat materials during the cure period. I told her to preserve the existing children's program while the violation was reviewed. I did not want volunteers locked out of lesson plans needed for activities already underway. I did not want children used as collateral damage in a fight between adults. I instructed her to include a separate written notice stating that Eden's name, image, medical information, and personal story had never been licensed for commercial use. At the bottom, I wrote one final instruction. Deliver Nolan's sealed box to Loretta Weller on Monday. I read the email twice. My parents would say I had acted while frightened. Sabrina would say I had weaponized Eden's accident. Gordon would show me budgets and contracts and tell me how many people my choice could harm. The monthly payment would stop before I knew whether the shop could survive weeks without me. I thought of Eden asking why her silence was always treated as sabotage. At 4:58, I pressed send. Miriam called 2 minutes later. I received it, she said. I need you to confirm verbally that you understand the suspension may create a dispute, stop your licensing income, and require the trust to defend its contractual rights. I understand. Do you want to withdraw? Or revise any instruction? No. Then I will execute it. The call ended at 5:03. I had not warned my family. I had not replied to their statements. I had not told them the plaque was with me or that Nolan had left a box. For the first time that day, I had made a decision before asking whether my mother would forgive me for it. The waiting continued. At 7:20, a surgical nurse called to say Eden was still in the operating room, but the team had controlled the worst of the bleeding. At 8:11, Dr. Over 7:20. Park came through the doors wearing a surgical cap and carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been standing for hours. Eden had survived the operation. The surgeons had stopped the bleeding and preserved part of her spleen. Her pressure had improved, but she had required multiple transfusions. She would spend the night in pediatric intensive care. They still needed to watch for renewed bleeding, infection, neurological changes, and complications from the pelvic fracture. "She is alive," I said. "Yes. Can I see her?" "As soon as the intensive care team settles her." I sat down because my legs stopped holding me. My phone showed 11 missed calls. 4 from Loretta, 3 from Gordon, 4 from Sabrina. There were messages beneath them. "Mom said your archive account is locked. Call us now. You cannot interfere with Foundation operations during a medical crisis. Whatever you sent can be reversed." "Mara, this is not protecting Eden." I silenced the phone. When I was allowed into the intensive care room, Eden looked smaller than she had on the mountain. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, but she was breathing without a ventilator. Her cast had not yet been placed. A temporary splint protected her wrist. Bruising had begun to darken along her shoulder and the side of her face. I sat beside her and placed one hand near hers without touching until the nurse said it was safe. Eden did not wake. I told her the plaque was safe. I told her the doctors had stopped the bleeding. I did not tell her I had fixed everything. I had made too many promises before understanding what they would cost. Just after dawn, my phone vibrated with a message from Miriam. The emergency suspension and cease-use notices had been served. Access to the trust-controlled archive had been disabled. Physical merchandise was under written stop-use demand. The community program remained protected during the 7-day cure period. A second message contained a photograph from the archive room. Nolan's shallow wooden box sat open on a packing table. Beside it lay his sealed letter and the red cotton cord he had left with written delivery instructions. Miriam would add the plaque and my notice, close the lid, and tie the cord before the package left the archive. She had followed my instruction. The box was leaving for Loretta's house that morning. On the lid, Nolan had written one sentence. "For Loretta, if the work becomes ours instead of theirs." 3 days after Eden fell through the platform, she still could not sit up without help. The surgeons had stopped the bleeding, but every movement pulled at the incision across her abdomen. Her left wrist rested in a temporary splint, and a wide support wrapped around her pelvis whenever nurses repositioned her. She slept in short, uneven stretches, and woke confused by medication, alarms, and the absence of windows in the intensive care room. On Monday morning, Dr. Park said Eden was no longer in immediate danger. She did not say Eden was safe. Her blood count had stabilized overnight, but the team was still watching for infection and delayed bleeding. The pelvic fracture would keep her from putting weight on her legs for at least 6 weeks. The concussion meant she could not tolerate bright screens or long conversations. When she opened her eyes, she usually asked one question and fell asleep before I could finish answering. That morning, she asked whether we were still at the mountain. "No," I said. "We're in Denver." Her forehead tightened. "The plaque?" "It's safe." She closed her eyes again. I had not told her where it was going. Pineglass confirmed that the upper platform remained closed. The insurer and county inspector had been notified, and the barrier placement was under review. My parents checked out without coming to the hospital. Loretta's voicemails began with prayers for Eden and ended with demands about the suspension. Gordon sent vendor spreadsheets. Sabrina deleted the poolside post and replaced it with a request for privacy, but the screenshot and copies shared by preview guests remained. Miriam advised me to preserve them without turning Eden's injuries into a public campaign. At 10:42, Miriam sent a courier photograph of the red bowed box alone on my mother's kitchen table. The plaque lay beneath the lid beside my cream trustee envelope. Nolan's smaller sealed letter remained untouched. Miriam confirmed that legal service had already started the 7-business-day cure period. The box was personal, not necessary for enforcement. Nolan had ordered it delivered so Loretta would understand the difference between losing permission and losing his trust. I remembered only fragments of his final preparations and realized he had anticipated that someone might love what his name provided more than what he believed. At 11:23, my phone rang. Loretta. I watched her name until the screen nearly went dark. Then I answered. Her face filled the video call. She stood in her kitchen, holding the phone too close. Her cheeks were flushed from the drive. Behind her, Gordon was removing his jacket. Sabrina stood near the island with one hand wrapped around a bottle of water. The red-bowed box sat on the table between them. Put the camera on, Loretta said. It is on. I want you to look at what you sent into my home. I could see the corner of her own image reflected in the dark kitchen window behind her. It seemed she had chosen video because she wanted a witness and expected the opening to expose the cruelty of what I had done. What is Eden's condition? She asked. Stable after surgery. Stable means she is going to recover. It means her blood pressure is holding today. Loretta closed her eyes briefly. I have barely slept. I said nothing. She turned the phone so the box filled most of the screen. This arrived with no warning. You received the suspension notice this morning. I mean this. Her fingers touched the red cord. For a moment, her voice stopped. She recognized the cord. Nolan had used the same red cotton on every print he gave her, and Miriam had followed his written instruction by tying the familiar uneven double loop. The knot did not pretend Nolan had packed the new documents himself. It told Loretta that he had planned the delivery long before any of us knew why it would be needed. On the screen, her thumb traced the shorter loop. Gordon stepped beside her. Open it. We have already lost half the day. Sabrina lifted her phone and tapped the screen. I still can't access the image library, she said. Every campaign folder says authorization suspended. Loretta looked toward her. Not now. The public launch files are in there. I said not now. She handed me to Gordon for a moment so she could loosen the cord. His face appeared at the edge of the frame. You could have called me before doing this, he said. I called from the helicopter. You shouted at us in front of sponsors. I asked you to follow your granddaughter to the hospital. You knew there was nothing we could do during surgery. You didn't know she would survive the flight. His mouth tightened. We were managing a crisis with hundreds of people present. I looked behind him at Sabrina. She was still trying to enter the archive from her phone. Loretta lifted the wooden lid. The brass plaque lay on top. The rescue team had cleaned away the visible blood before the item was released, but the metal remained bent. Dirt still filled part of Nolan's engraved name. One corner had folded backward. Loretta stared at it. What did you do to this? She asked. I didn't bend it. Why would you send it here like this? So you could see what Eden was holding when the platform broke. Sabrina looked up from her phone. She was not supposed to be in that area. The barrier had been moved. That does not mean she had permission. She went after the plaque you said would be dumped. I said it in frustration. You said it in front of her. Loretta reached into the box and lifted the plaque with both hands. The metal caught the light from the kitchen window. Nolan's name looked fractured where the surface had buckled. My mother set it down too quickly. Loretta removed the large cream envelope beneath it. The front read from Mara Hollis, acting trustee. She looked directly into the phone. This is what you wanted me to see? I wanted you to read it. She broke the seal and unfolded the notice. Her eyes moved through the first page while Gordon leaned over her shoulder. Immediate suspension pending cure, Loretta read aloud. We already know about the suspension, Gordon said. Loretta turned another page. This includes the commercial company. It was always going to include the company, he replied. She continued reading until Gordon took the final pages to examine the numbered conditions. The Weller Foundation and Weller Legacy Experiences could no longer access trust-controlled digital files. They had to stop using the Nolan Hollis name, the Quiet Hour service mark, photographs, educational materials, quotations, and archive assets in merchandise or commercial promotion during the cure period. Existing children's activities could continue temporarily if they did not create new promotional use or transfer the material to the company. Eden's name, image, personal history, medical information, and grief story had never been licensed. Sabrina stepped closer. That last part is false. What part? I asked. We had family consent for the preview. You had consent for her to attend. The form included photography. It did not authorize a commercial campaign called The Girl Who Survived Grief. It was a working title. It used her school photograph. Because she is Nolan's daughter. That is not permission. Sabrina folded her arms. You know how nonprofit storytelling works. People support a mission when they see the human result. My daughter is not your result. Loretta reached for the document. What do they mean by cure? Gordon looked at the final pages. They want the LLC sublicense canceled. They want the campaign stopped. They want governance review and independent oversight of the community program. Independent from whom? Us. Loretta laughed once, but there was no amusement in it. So that is the plan. It is not a plan, I said. It is the condition for continuing to use Nolan. You want to remove me from the foundation I built. I want the commercial retreat separated from his name. I want Eden removed from every campaign. I want the children's program protected by people who are not using it to sell luxury cabins. You think the free programs pay for themselves? No. Then you know exactly why we expanded. Expansion did not require using Eden. Everything requires a story, Mara. Donors do not fund silence. Nolan did. Loretta's face changed. She looked down into the box. The smaller envelope lay beneath the suspension notice. Nolan had written her name across the front in the same narrow handwriting that appeared on the plaque. Loretta. No title. No instruction visible from where I watched. She picked it up slowly. You knew this was in here, she said. I knew he left something addressed to you. I did not know the words. You sent it anyway. He directed Miriam to deliver it if the license was suspended for crossing a boundary. What boundary? Open it. Loretta's fingers moved beneath the seal. The paper resisted at first. Nolan had closed the envelope 6 years earlier. She tore one side, pulled out a folded sheet, and began to read. I could not see every line. I knew only what she later read aloud, and what Miriam confirmed belonged to the delivery instructions. Loretta's eyes stopped near the top. Gordon asked what it said. She did not answer. Sabrina moved closer, but Loretta turned slightly away from her. Mom? Loretta read the first sentence aloud. The work was never meant to make our family important. Her voice became quieter on the final word. She continued. If a child must surrender privacy, grief, or choice so the program can grow, then the program has confused being seen with doing good. Sabrina shook her head. He wrote that before social media fundraising became essential. Loretta held up one hand. She read the next section silently. Her mouth opened, then closed. What does it say? Gordon asked. She looked at me through the phone. I could not read her thoughts. I saw only the way her grip tightened until the paper bent between her fingers. Then she read another line. Eden is my daughter, not evidence of anyone's goodness. The kitchen became still. Even Sabrina stopped touching her phone. Loretta's eyes moved to the bottom of the page. If the work cannot continue without using her, Do not use my name. My mother screamed. It was not a long sound. It broke from her so sharply that Gordon reached for the paper, and Sabrina stepped backward. Loretta pressed one hand against the table. No. Gordon took the letter from her. Let me see. No. You read it aloud. You don't understand. I understand that Nolan wrote a contingency letter. He wrote this to me. Her voice cracked. She grabbed the phone and brought her face close to the screen. You made him accuse me after he died. I did not write that letter. You filled his head with fear before he died. I did not know the letter existed. He trusted me with his program. He trusted you with conditions. I gave 6 years of my life to keeping him alive. Nolan is not alive inside the retreat. Loretta recoiled as if I had struck her. Behind her, Gordon unfolded the suspension notice again. We need to stop talking like this is final, he said. There is a cure period. 7 business days. Sabrina picked up the phone she had set down. I can remove Eden from the campaign. We change the title, replace the school photograph, and rebuild the trailer from the sponsor footage. The LLC has to stop using Nolan, Gordon said, temporarily, unless the trust accepts the cure. Loretta looked between them. What cure are you suggesting? Gordon flattened the notice against the table. We terminate the current sublicense on paper, revise the licensing structure, and document the retreat as a fundraising arm supporting the nonprofit. Miriam had warned me that Gordon would search for language that changed the appearance without changing the control. That is not a cure, I said. It addresses the transfer issue. The company still belongs to the 3 of you. So does the foundation. That is the problem. Sabrina leaned toward the phone. You are trying to take the foundation because Eden made a reckless decision. I am not taking it. You want outside governance. I want Nolan's work protected from your company. You never cared about governance when the checks reached your shop. The words landed because they were true enough to hurt. I should have cared sooner, I said. Loretta laughed bitterly. So now you confess and punish everyone else. I am accepting the same suspension. My payment stopped too. You can afford principals because I built the organization paying you. I cannot afford this. Then withdraw it. I looked through the ICU glass. Eden remained asleep beneath a thin blanket. Her body had paid for the version of peace I could no longer defend. The cure is in Nolan's letter, I said. Stop using Eden. Separate the retreat from his name. Let the children's program operate under independent oversight. Loretta placed both palms on the kitchen table. No. The word came without hesitation. Gordon turned toward her. We should review every option before deciding. I am not handing Nolan's work to strangers because Mara is frightened. They would not own the trust. They would control the foundation. Sabrina stepped beside her. Mom is right. If we give up governance, we give up the story. The sponsors will follow whoever controls the narrative. I looked at all 3 of them through the screen. No one blamed Sabrina for the post. No one asked Gordon why the barrier had been moved. No one told Loretta she should have left the pool. They did not turn on one another. They closed ranks. Loretta folded Nolan's letter and held it against her chest. You will reverse this, she said. No, you are speaking from a hospital hallway after a traumatic weekend. I sent the email because of what happened before the hospital. Your daughter entered a restricted area. My daughter nearly died protecting something you were willing to throw away. It was a plaque. It had his name. His name is on everything because of me. That was the closest Loretta came to saying what I heard beneath all her arguments. In her version of the story, Nolan's name had survived because she carried it, and that made her act as though it belonged to her. Gordon stepped in front of the phone. We will respond through the cure process. Until then, do not contact sponsors or staff. I have not contacted either. Do not interfere with the launch. You cannot use Nolan's materials during suspension. We understand the notice. Sabrina spoke behind him. We understand what she is trying to do. Gordon ended the call before I could answer. The screen went dark. For several seconds, I saw my own reflection instead of their kitchen. My hair was unwashed. My hospital visitor badge had curled at one corner. Behind me, monitors flashed through the ICU glass. I placed the phone on the chair. The box had not defeated them. Nolan's letter had not transformed my mother into someone willing to name what she had chosen. To me, the scream did not sound like remorse. It sounded like the shock of discovering that Nolan's own words would not always stand on her side. The suspension gave them 7 business days to choose. They could end the commercial use, remove Eden, accept independent oversight, and preserve the children's work under Nolan's name. Or they could keep control. The box had ended their certainty. The cure period would show what they actually valued. Eden opened her eyes the morning after my mother screamed over Nolan's letter and asked the same question she had asked before surgery. "Where's the plaque?" Her voice was barely more than air. Medication made each word slow, and the concussion forced her to pause as though she had to find her way back to the sentence. "It's safe," I said. "Here?" "No." Her eyes moved toward me. I had promised not to soften the truth for her anymore. I sent it to Grandma's house. Eden tried to lift her head. Pain crossed her face before the monitors could register the change. "Why?" "Don't move. Please." "Why did you send it to her?" I adjusted the pillow without touching her until she gave me a small nod. "It was inside a box Nolan left with Miriam. I needed Grandma to see what you were holding when you fell. She'll throw it away again." "She can't. The plaque belongs to the trust. Miriam documented the delivery. If your grandparents don't correct the violations, Miriam will retrieve it." Eden stared at the ceiling. "That doesn't mean Grandma won't hurt it." "It's already bent." "I don't mean the metal." I stopped. For 5 years I had treated objects connected to Nolan as if protecting them meant protecting him. I had allowed my parents to place his name on anything they wanted, because I believed visibility was the same as remembrance. Eden understood something I had refused to see. The plaque could survive a fall. What mattered was what the adults around it believed they were entitled to do. "Grandma read a letter Dad wrote to her," I said. "What did it say?" "That the program was meant for children, not for our family's importance. That nobody should use you to make the work grow." Eden's eyes closed. "Did she say sorry?" "No." "Did she ask to see me?" "She asked about your condition before opening the box." "That's not the same." "No." Eden fell asleep before I could say more. Later that afternoon, Dr. Park reduced one of the medications that had kept Eden heavily sedated. She woke for longer periods, though bright light made her squint and questions exhausted her quickly. A nurse helped raise the head of the bed several inches. Eden gripped the sheet with her right hand until the movement stopped. Dr. Park reminded her not to twist her torso. "How long until I can walk?" Eden asked. "We are not measuring this in days," Dr. Park said. Eden looked at me. I kept my mouth closed. Dr. Park continued carefully. The pelvic fracture was stable, but Eden could not put weight through her legs for at least 6 weeks. Her wrist would make transfers difficult because she could not safely lean on crutches or a walker. The abdominal incision had to heal before she could use her core normally. The concussion meant she would tire quickly, lose focus, and sometimes feel worse after activities that seemed small. "You may have good hours," Dr. Park said. "A good hour does not mean the injuries are gone." "Can I go home?" "Not yet." "When?" "When the surgical team is satisfied with your abdomen, and when we know whether you can transfer safely. You may need inpatient rehabilitation first." Eden looked away. "I don't want people helping me in the bathroom." "I understand." "No, you don't." Dr. Park did not argue. "No," she said. "I don't know what that loss of privacy feels like for you. I know our job is to help you regain as much independence as possible without putting you back in danger." Eden's expression softened by a fraction. Dr. Park asked whether Eden remembered the fall. "Pieces." "Do you want to talk about them now?" Eden looked at me. I could not tell whether she wanted me to leave or stay. "Do you want me here?" I asked. She thought for several seconds. "Stay. Don't answer for me." "I won't." Dr. Park sat in the chair beside the bed rather than standing over her. Eden began with Sabrina's new sign. They covered Dad's name. "The new logo?" Dr. Park asked. Eden nodded. Aunt Sabrina said the old plaque ruined the aesthetic. I had not heard her use those exact words at the Overlook. "What happened next?" Dr. Park asked. "They took it off." "Did anyone tell you not to enter the maintenance area?" "There was a yellow barrier." "Where?" "Across the path when we got there." "And later?" "It wasn't there." I felt the back of my neck tighten. Dr. Park kept her voice neutral. "Did you see anyone move it?" "Grandpa told the maintenance man to move it because it was in the camera." Eden paused and pressed her lips together. "What did you do after the plaque was removed?" "I took pictures." "Then what?" "They put it by the service cart." She swallowed. "Aunt Sabrina said they'd dump it after the preview." Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "I thought the cart was going to leave." "So you went to get it," I said. Eden turned toward me. I had answered for her. "Sorry," I said. "You tell it." She looked back at Dr. Park. I stepped onto the back path. I thought it was just where the workers walked. The board made a sound. "What kind of sound?" "Like when ice cracks under something heavy." Her breathing changed. Dr. Park stopped the questions. "You are in the hospital," she said. "The platform is not here. You do not have to finish this now." Eden looked at the blanket over her legs. "I didn't run," she said. "I wasn't doing something stupid." "I know," I said. "You told them I was dramatic before." "I was wrong. I just didn't want Dad thrown away." The words came out smaller than everything before them. I reached toward her hand, then stopped before touching it. "Can I hold your hand?" She hesitated, then turned her right palm upward. I placed my fingers across hers. The resort's incident summary arrived that evening through a secure parent portal. It was not a final report. The document listed only confirmed actions and the steps Pineglass had taken after the fall. The upper platform and maintenance access were closed. The resort's insurer had been notified. The county building inspector had ordered the structure preserved until an examination could be completed. The report confirmed that a maintenance barrier had originally blocked the service path. It also confirmed that the barrier had been moved shortly before sponsor photography began. The person who moved it was not named in the summary, but the reason was recorded. Visual obstruction in sponsor footage. I read that sentence 3 times. The document also stated that the brass plaque had been removed at the direction of an event representative and placed beside a service cart. Eden had not invented the sequence. She had not misremembered the barrier because of the concussion. The restricted area had been marked, then made to look open, because safety equipment interfered with the image my family wanted. The insurer included a separate notice. A limited medical pay provision might cover some immediate expenses without deciding legal fault. Liability remained under investigation. No settlement had been offered. No one promised the resort would pay everything. I saved the documents and closed the portal. For several minutes, I watched Eden sleep. She had been forced to prove what happened with broken bones, photographs, and a resort report before the adults who failed her would stop calling her reckless. I had taught her to expect that. The next morning, she woke while a nurse was helping her drink water through a straw. The nurse left us alone after checking the monitors. "I read the resort summary," I said. Eden kept her eyes on the cup. "It says the barrier was moved before the filming. It confirms the plaque was taken down." She handed me the cup. "Okay. I believe you." "You believe the report." The sentence cut cleanly. "I believed you before I saw it." "You said I went back because I was upset." "I said that before you explained." "I explained at the mountain." You were in pain. I said they were throwing it away. I know. You always know after. I sat very still. Eden looked at the blanket. You always apologize after they finish. I could have told her I had been frightened. I could have reminded her I climbed into the helicopter and stayed through surgery. I could have said I was the only person who had not left. All of those things were true. None answered what she had said. When Sabrina made you leave the live stream, I asked you to apologize, I said. She didn't make me leave. She pushed you until leaving was the only way to stop it. Eden looked at me again. When Grandma called you ungrateful, I said she was grieving. When Grandpa said the free programs mattered more than how you felt, I asked you to think about the other children. When Sabrina called you attention-seeking, I told you not to let one word become a fight. My throat tightened. I kept waiting for them to finish hurting you before I decided the hurt was real. Eden's face did not change. I am sorry. You said that. I know. What happens the next time? I ask you before I explain them. That sounds easy now. It won't be easy. I have spent years doing the opposite. She turned her head toward the window. I did not ask her to forgive me. A few hours later, Loretta called the nurses' station and asked to visit. The hospital did not give her Eden's room number or condition. Dr. Park had already documented that medical updates could be shared only through me. Loretta called my phone instead. I am in Denver, she said. Sabrina is with me. Why? To see Eden. You drove here without asking? She is my granddaughter. That was true while you were at the pool. Loretta inhaled slowly. I am not discussing the preview in a hospital hallway. I'm not in the hallway. I want to see her. I will ask. A pause followed. You need my permission now? She does. She is 14. She is awake, and this visit is about her. What if she says no because she is confused by medication? Then the answer is no. You are turning her against us. She watched you stay behind. She was unconscious during most of that. She saw enough before the helicopter door closed. Loretta lowered her voice. Sabrina needs to explain that post. Does she want to apologize? She wants to give context. That isn't what I asked. You are making every word impossible. I will ask Eden. I ended the call before my mother could replace the request with another argument. Eden was resting, with her eyes open. Grandma and Aunt Sabrina drove to Denver, I said. They want to visit. She looked toward the door. Are they outside? Not on this floor. Did you tell them my room? No. Does Sabrina still have that post? She deleted it. That isn't what I asked. I saved a screenshot. Other people probably did too. Eden thought for a moment. I don't want Sabrina here. Okay. Grandma will say I'm punishing her. Eden watched my face as if waiting for the correction. It did not come. Can Grandpa get updates? She asked. What kind? If I'm alive, if surgery worked, nothing about what I say. I can give all three of them the same basic medical update through one message. No pictures. No pictures. No video calls. No video calls. And don't tell them I cried. I won't. She shifted slightly and winced. Tell Grandma I don't want to see Sabrina. Do you want to see Grandma alone? Not today. All right. When I sent the message, Loretta responded immediately. This is not Eden speaking. I did not defend myself. I wrote one sentence. These are Eden's instructions. Miriam arrived that afternoon, carrying a slim archival case and a folder. She washed her hands, followed the nurse's directions, and waited near the foot of the bed until Eden looked at her. I brought something your father left for your 14th year, Miriam said. Eden's eyes moved to the case. Did Mom read it? No, Miriam said. I did not know it existed, I added. Miriam removed a sealed cream envelope. Eden's name was written across the front in Nolan's handwriting. For Eden at 14. Eden reached with her right hand, but stopped before taking it. Do I have to read it now? No, Miriam said. Does it say what I'm supposed to do? I don't know. I have never opened it. Eden looked at me. I kept my hands in my lap. The nurse opened the bedside drawer, and Eden asked her to place the envelope inside. Not where everyone can see it, Eden said. The nurse slid it beneath a folded cloth. Miriam did not tell Eden that Nolan would have wanted her to read it. She did not call the envelope a gift or a final message. She let it remain what it was, Eden's choice. After Eden tired and closed her eyes, Miriam and I stepped into a consultation room down the hall. She placed the foundation license on the table. I had signed the original agreement in February 2021. My signature looked unfamiliar. The letters were narrow and rushed. Written by someone who wanted the document finished. Before grief made her reconsider every page, Miriam showed me the section concerning minors. The foundation could photograph attendees for limited nonprofit event documentation only with guardian consent. Any commercial campaign using a child's identity, family history, grief, medical information, or relationship to Nolan required separate written approval from the trustee and age-appropriate agreement from the child. Did I approve anything called the girl who survived grief? I asked. No. Did I approve the daughter he left behind? No. Sabrina said they had family consent. They have an event attendance form. It permits limited photography during scheduled activities. It does not permit a commercial documentary, a paid retreat campaign, or the use of Eden as an emotional anchor. So they did not forge my signature. Nothing I have seen suggests that. They treated a narrow permission as if it covered everything they wanted. That almost made it worse. No hidden criminal mastermind had created the violation. They had simply grown accustomed to believing my silence meant yes. Miriam turned to the financial pages. The monthly payment you received was partly licensing and partly archival consultation. I know. Eden may ask about it. She already knows the payment stopped. Does she know why you accepted it? I looked through the small window in the door. Eden's room was not visible from where I stood. It helped keep the shop open after Nolan died. That is true. It also helped me avoid asking what they were doing. Miriam closed the folder. That is for you to tell her. When I returned to Eden's room, the envelope remained hidden in the drawer. She was awake. Miriam showed me the license, I said. Did you sign it? Yes. Did it say they could use me? No. It said they needed separate permission. I never gave it. But you gave them Dad. I gave them limited permission to use his work for free children's programs. And they paid you? Yes. How much? $1,500 a month. Eden stared at me. That's why you always said the program was helping us. It did help us. Every time Sabrina made me film something, did you think about the money? No rose-colored answer could survive that question. I don't know what I thought each time. That means yes. It means I chose not to look closely, because looking might have stopped the payment and started a fight. She turned away. I let not knowing become a choice. The room stayed quiet except for the monitor. After a while, Eden spoke. I need rules. All right. No hospital pictures. Not even to show people I'm okay. All right. Don't tell anyone what Dad wrote in my letter, if I read it. I won't. And stop calling me strong when I don't feel strong. I swallowed. I will. Even if people ask what I said, I'll tell them it is private. Even if Grandma says I'm making you do this. Yes. Eden looked back at me. You said yes fast. I should have said it sooner. She did not smile. But she did not look away. The next morning, Sabrina posted a statement telling the community that I had turned Eden's accident into a weapon. Sabrina's statement appeared the next morning. Without naming Eden, she accused a grieving relative of weaponizing a child's accident and warned that employees and vulnerable children could lose services because of a private dispute. Parents flooded my shop account, and a reporter requested a hospital photograph, even one with Eden's face obscured. I refused. Showing her cast, monitors, and incision might have destroyed Sabrina's version, but it would also have turned Eden's body into my argument. Instead, I issued one statement. Eden was recovering. Her privacy was not available for debate. Licensed uses were under review, and existing children's services had not been ordered to close. Eden noticed I had not used her injuries to win. She handed the phone back. "Are you going to change it?" "No." She looked at me for several seconds. "Okay." It was not praise. It was a test I had passed without asking her to reward me. Miriam arrived that afternoon with one narrow file box. She had warned me she would not bring every archive record or turn the hospital into a legal office. The documents inside were limited to material she already held as the trust's administrative agent. We used a family consultation room down the hall from Eden's unit. Daniel Ruiz joined us by video from Fort Collins. Miriam placed 6 folders on the table. The first contained the original nonprofit license. The second held documents showing how Weller Legacy Experiences had been using Nolan's name. The third contained promotional material featuring Eden. The remaining folders covered merchandise, the public launch, and the current summer programs. "No hidden server search," Miriam said. "No private accounts. Every document here was submitted to the trust for approval, placed in a shared licensed folder, or sent to a donor using trust-controlled material." I opened the retreat brochure first. The cover showed a luxury cabin facing the mountains. Beneath the photograph were the words, "Live the courage Nolan left us." The lowest price package cost $4,800 for 3 nights. The premium package cost $11,500. It included private trail access, a chef's dinner, a guided grief session, professional photography, a donor reception, and an invitation to a fireside conversation with the Hollis family. "What Hollis family?" I asked. Miriam turned the page. A draft schedule listed me and Eden for a Saturday evening session called Living After Loss. I had never agreed to attend. Eden's role was described as an authentic youth voice who would share how Nolan's work helped her transform grief into purpose. "She was 12 when this draft started," I said. "The earliest version is dated January," Miriam replied. "She was 13. Daniel's face tightened on the laptop screen. "I never saw this package." "You saw the retreat plan," Miriam said. "I saw a proposal for donor weekends that would subsidize free camps. I did not see Eden listed as programming." I opened the next folder. The storyboard was titled, "The Girl Who Survived Grief." The first scene used a school photograph of Eden at age 10. The narrator's draft described her as a child left behind by tragedy who had learned to walk her father's paths alone. The next page called for shots of Eden holding Nolan's camera, standing at the plaque, and reading from one of his letters. A margin note in Sabrina's handwriting said that Eden resisted scripted emotion and might need a smaller crew. Another note suggested filming her from farther away, so she would feel the camera was not focused directly on her. My stomach turned. "That live stream wasn't a mistake," I said. Miriam said nothing. "It was a test." Daniel looked away from his screen. The storyboard continued through the commercial launch. Eden was supposed to be the emotional center, connecting the expensive retreat to the charitable program. Wealthy guests would be told their purchase helped girls like her turn pain into leadership. Eden was not a beneficiary of the program. She was the product proving it worked. The merchandise folder contained shirts, journals, prints, water bottles, and leather camera straps. Some items used Nolan's registered name. Others used the Quiet Hour mark beneath sponsor logos. One proposed journal opened with a printed prompt. "What pain will you turn into purpose today?" Nolan had created the Quiet Hour because children did not have to turn pain into anything. I found the program revision in the final folder. The original schedule reserved one silent hour without cameras, interviews, or sponsor participation. Sabrina's revision removed it. The reason appeared in a planning note. No sponsor visibility. No usable content. Low engagement value. Daniel admitted he had argued against the changes, but stayed silent because the foundation had lost grants and staff depended on the schedule. I kept thinking the next change would be the line, he said. Then the line moved. He proposed one possible bridge. Mountain Youth Alliance, an established outdoor nonprofit with insurance, payroll, and child safety systems, might review a fiscal sponsorship. Miriam warned that it was not a rescue plan. A new limited license, due diligence, employee notices, donor approval, and independent governance would still be required. The cure deadline remained July 23rd. My parents could preserve Nolan's license by ending the commercial transfer, removing Eden, and accepting oversight, but their responses kept the retreat and family control intact. Gordon also warned that canceling the August launch would trigger refunds and vendor obligations. I knew. That evening, the hospital billing office sent the first estimate. Insurance would cover most of the emergency transport, surgery, and acute care, after the deductible and coinsurance. That did not include every rehabilitation expense, accessible transportation, home modifications, or the income I was losing each day the shop remained closed. I had $14,000 in savings. The shop brought in about $95,000 a year before expenses, but my actual income was less than half of that. The licensing payment had covered $18,000 each year. Now it was gone. My assistant, Leah, had kept urgent print orders moving for 3 days, but she could not operate the large press alone or complete restoration work that required my approval. 2 clients had already asked for refunds because I could not meet their deadlines. I opened the shop accounts on my laptop. The lease payment was due in 12 days. Payroll was due the following Friday. One of the presses could be sold, but it was the machine that handled our highest margin wedding and memorial orders. Selling it might produce enough cash for several months while making the business less capable of recovering afterward. I listed the expected expenses: insurance deductible and coinsurance, rehabilitation outside the preferred network if the nearest available bed did not qualify, a temporary ramp at home, bathroom modifications, an accessible vehicle service for appointments, weeks of lost income, travel between Fort Collins, Denver, and wherever Eden entered rehabilitation. The cash gap reached $48,000 before I included anything unexpected. I stared at the number until the screen dimmed. Eden slept in the next room with her private envelope still unopened in the drawer. I had told her I would not let anyone buy her story. I had not yet understood how expensive that promise could become. On Friday morning, Gordon asked to meet. He did not request access to Eden's room. He reserved a family consultation space on the hospital's ground floor and sent me the location. I told Dr. Park where I was going. She said Eden would be asleep after therapy and that a nurse would call if anything changed. Gordon was waiting beside the window when I entered. He wore a gray shirt without the foundation logo. A leather folder rested on the table. No Loretta. No Sabrina. You came alone, I said. This is a financial conversation. That never stops Mom from joining. She is too angry to be useful. He did not say Loretta was wrong. He opened the folder. I reviewed the likely costs of Eden's recovery. How? General estimates. I do not have access to her private medical records. Good. You are losing income while staying here. Your insurance will leave gaps. Your house is not equipped for a wheelchair. Your shop cannot remain closed indefinitely. I know. He turned a page toward me. The document offered up to $75,000. Payments would go directly toward verified medical, rehabilitation, transportation, and accessibility expenses. It was not a suitcase full of cash. It was structured to sound responsible. What do you want? I asked. 3 corrections. He placed another document beside the offer. The first stated that Eden had entered a restricted maintenance area without permission. That part is true, he said. The barrier had been moved. The area was still restricted. She is 14. She is old enough to understand a maintenance path is not public. She saw the barrier blocking it earlier, then you moved it. I asked an employee to relocate it from the camera frame. I did not instruct Eden to enter. The second statement described Sabrina's poolside caption as a private family joke that had been misunderstood when circulated outside its intended audience. You expect me to sign that? I expect you to acknowledge context. She posted it publicly. For less than 8 hours, after reading that Eden was going into surgery, Sabrina panicked. She ordered a cocktail. Gordon's jaw tightened. The third correction is the only one affecting the foundation. I read it. I would withdraw the emergency suspension and restore the license for 6 months while the parties negotiated a revised governance agreement. During that period, the public launch could proceed. Weller Legacy Experiences would be allowed to fulfill existing contracts. Eden's image would be removed from new material, but the retreat could continue using Nolan's name and licensed assets. You want 6 months to sell what the license never allowed. I want time to unwind obligations without destroying the foundation. You had time before the preview. We believed the commercial arm was permitted as fundraising support. Miriam says the license is clear. Miriam works for the trust. She administers it, and you control it. I did not write the agreement. You signed it. His finger touched the $75,000 figure. This is not a bribe. What do you call money offered in exchange for a false statement? A settlement. Families settle disputes every day. Eden is still in the hospital, which is why I am offering enough to protect her recovery. You could help her without asking me to lie. If I pay without resolving the dispute, I expose myself and the foundation to further claims. You know that. You are her grandfather. I am also responsible for employees, vendors, donors, and contractual obligations. She almost died. And money will not undo that. It can determine whether she receives the best rehabilitation available. He pushed the folder closer. The offer would cover the gap I had calculated. I could keep the shop. I could install the ramp without waiting. I could choose a rehabilitation program based on Eden's needs instead of the insurance network. I could stop pretending Courage would pay invoices. Gordon watched me read each page. You do not have to decide this minute, he said. But the cure period is running. The longer the suspension continues, the more expensive every outcome becomes. What happens if I refuse? You sell equipment. You close the shop for months. You depend on an insurer that may dispute every additional service. You tell Eden that protecting a licensing principle mattered more than giving her every advantage. The words were designed to sound like concern. They found the exact place fear had already opened. I need to review this, I said. With whom? That is not your decision. Do not show it to Eden. I looked up. Why? She is 14, medicated and angry. This is an adult financial settlement. It asks me to describe what happened to her. It asks you to resolve a dispute so she can recover. I closed the folder. I said I need to review it. Gordon stood. For what it is worth. I never wanted the post. You stayed in the photograph. I was trying to keep Loretta and Sabrina from creating a larger scene. You always stand beside the damage and call it management. His face hardened. I am offering you a way to protect your daughter. He left the consultation room before I answered. I remained at the table with the folder beneath my hands. For the first time since I sent the email, doing the right thing looked exactly like making my daughter pay for it. I carried Gordon's offer back upstairs without opening it again. The folder felt heavier than paper should. $75,000 was enough to make every practical fear sound reasonable. It could cover the temporary ramp, the bathroom changes, the rehabilitation gap, and months of lost income. It could keep me from selling the press that produced almost a third of my shop's revenue. It could also purchase 3 sentences that were not true. Eden had entered a maintenance area. That fact stood alone on Gordon's page, as if the barrier had never been moved and the plaque had never been threatened. Sabrina's post had been a joke. That sentence erased the read receipts, the surgery message, and the helicopter in the background. The license should be restored. That sentence would give them 6 more months to use Nolan's name while they called the delay responsible management. I placed the folder in the bottom of my bag before returning to Eden's room. She was asleep after a difficult therapy assessment. 2 rehabilitation specialists had tested how much assistance she would need to move from bed to chair. Her right hand could grip the transfer rail, but her left wrist could not bear pressure. Her abdominal muscles were still healing, and the pelvic fracture made every shift painful. The assessment lasted less than 15 minutes. Eden slept for nearly 2 hours afterward. While she rested, I took my laptop into the family lounge and calculated the same numbers again. $14,000 in savings, a monthly shop lease, payroll for Leah, insurance deductibles and coinsurance, transportation between Fort Collins and Denver, a ramp wide enough for a wheelchair, temporary grab bars and a shower chair. The possibility that the rehabilitation facility with the right pediatric program would be outside our preferred insurance network. The shop could survive a short closure. It could not survive indefinitely without either my labor or a significant reduction in expenses. I entered the estimated value of the large press. Selling it would produce between $22,000 and $26,000 if I found a buyer quickly. After paying the remaining equipment loan, I might keep $17,000. The smaller restoration press would bring less. Selling both would turn the shop into a design desk and a room full of work I could no longer complete. I closed the spreadsheet and opened it again. The numbers did not become kinder, because I checked them twice. Miriam called at noon. "I need to ask about the trust," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "What specifically? Can it pay any of Eden's personal expenses?" "No. Not even rehabilitation?" "The trust instrument limits distributions to archive preservation, intellectual property administration, and community grants. Eden will eventually control certain rights, but it is not a medical support trust." "What if the accident happened during an activity using Nolan's name? That may affect insurance or liability questions. It does not change the trust instrument." "So this is not because the license is suspended?" "No. The restriction existed before the suspension and will remain afterward." I looked through the lounge window toward the hospital corridor. "Nolan did that on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" "He did not want Eden's health, education, or ordinary needs tied to whether people continued licensing his work. That sounds protective until you are sitting beside a bill." "I know." "No, you know the document." Miriam did not defend herself. I rubbed one hand across my forehead. "I'm sorry." "You are allowed to be angry at a structure that is inconvenient now," she said. "You should still understand why it exists before you change it." "I cannot change it quickly." "No, and I cannot borrow against the archive. Not under the current terms. There was no hidden account, no emergency inheritance, no forgotten insurance policy waiting inside one of Nolan's boxes. The red bowed box had contained a boundary, not money. I told Miriam about Gordon's offer. She asked me to read the 3 required statements exactly as written. When I finished, she did not tell me whether to accept. "Would signing restore the license?" I asked. "Not by itself. You would also need to send a trustee instruction withdrawing the suspension. The trust would then need to decide whether the contractual breach had actually been cured." "I am the trustee." "You are. You would be instructing the trust to treat the breach as temporarily resolved. Could I restore it for 6 months and then stop it later?" "You could attempt that. The family would argue they relied on the restoration and incurred additional obligations. It would complicate everything. So the 6 months are not time to negotiate. They are time to make stopping them more expensive. That is a reasonable concern." I looked down at the folder. "Do you think Nolan would want me to refuse?" "I will not use a dead man to make your decision for you. The answer hurt because it was the correct one. After the call, I returned to Eden's room. Her eyes were open. A nurse had raised the bed and placed a tray across her lap. Eden was trying to hold a cup with her right hand while keeping her body still. "Can I help?" I asked. "Hold the straw." I adjusted it until she could drink. My phone rang on the windowsill. Gordon. I should have silenced it. Instead, I answered, because part of me wanted to ask whether he could remove one condition. I put the call on speaker while keeping both hands near Eden's cup. "Have you reviewed the proposal?" he asked. "Not fully. You have had several hours. My daughter is in the hospital. That is why the offer is time-sensitive." Eden's eyes moved toward the phone. I reached for it, but Gordon continued. "The $75,000 remains available if we resolve this before the cure deadline." I took the call off speaker too late. Eden had heard the number. "I'll call you back," I said. "Do not wait until the offer becomes impossible." I ended the call. Eden watched me set the phone face down. "What is $75,000? "A proposal from Grandpa." "For what?" I moved the tray aside. "You do not need to deal with this right now." Her expression hardened. "That means it's about me. It is about the accident and the license. What does he want to buy?" The word "buy" made my chest tighten. He offered to pay verified medical, rehabilitation, and accessibility costs up to $75,000. "What do you have to do?" I sat beside the bed. "There are 3 conditions." "Tell me." "You are tired." "I'm still going to know later." I looked at the monitor, the cast, and the blanket covering legs she could not use. Then I told her. The first statement said she entered the restricted area by choice. "I did," she said. "The barrier had been moved, and the statement leaves that out." "Okay." The second says Sabrina's post was a private joke that people misunderstood. Eden's face went still. "What is the third?" "I withdraw the suspension and restore the license for 6 months, so they can use Dad again." "Yes." "And me?" "They say they will remove your image from new material." "New material?" "Yes." "What about the film and everything they already made?" "The agreement is not clear enough." She looked toward the drawer containing Nolan's letter. "They already used what happened to Dad," she said. "Don't let them buy what happened to me." I wanted to say I would refuse immediately. The answer rose into my throat, with the same instinct that had made me promise the adoption of peace, the safety of family, and the certainty of adults who had never earned certainty. I stopped. "I need 1 night," I said. Eden's eyes flashed with hurt. "1 night to decide if the money is worth lying? 1 night to make sure refusing does not become another decision I make for you without understanding the cost. I told you what I want." "I heard you. Then why do you need a night?" "Because you should not have to carry the responsibility for whether I can pay the bills. I need to decide as your mother and as trustee. Not make you decide because Grandpa put the money next to your recovery." She turned her face away. "I don't want the money." "I know." "Do you?" I looked at the folder inside my bag. "Yes." The answer made her look back. "I want the ramp. I want the best rehabilitation bed. I want to keep the shop. I want to stop checking the cost before I say yes to something you need." That evening, I began writing Eden a long apology, then deleted it when I realized every paragraph explained me. The next morning, a reporter asked for confirmation of her injuries. A donor asked whether limited hospital verification was available, and Miriam asked about using Nolan's private letter in the trust's response. I declined all 3. I told Eden there would be no hospital picture, medical release, or private letter used to help me win. She did not praise me. She only watched to see whether I meant it. I took Gordon's folder from my bag. "No one gets to use your pain now," I said. "Not them, not me." "Does that mean you're refusing?" "Yes. You said you needed a night." "I did." "What changed?" "Nothing about what happened. I needed to admit that I wanted the money before I could refuse it honestly. I wrote a short response to Gordon. I did not accuse him of bribery. I did not threaten legal action. I did not mention the poolside post beyond stating that I would not sign a false description of it. I wrote that I would not characterize the accident in a way that omitted the moved barrier, would not call the public post a private joke, and would not restore a materially breached license in exchange for medical payments. I thanked him for identifying the maximum amount he believed Eden's recovery required. Then I declined. His answer arrived 12 minutes later. You are choosing pride over her recovery. I read the sentence twice. Part of me believed him. Pride was an easy word to use against anyone who refused help with conditions. It made boundaries sound decorative and survival sound practical. I did not feel proud. I felt terrified. I sent no reply. That afternoon, Eden asked the nurse to take Nolan's envelope from the drawer. She held it in her right hand and studied her name. Do you want me to leave? I asked. No. Do you want me to stay by the door? Sit there. She pointed to the chair near the window. I sat. Eden turned the envelope away from me before breaking the seal. The movement was deliberate. She wanted me present without giving me access. I looked out the window while she unfolded the paper. The city below moved through ordinary traffic. Cars entered the parking garage. A delivery truck waited at a light. Somewhere beyond the hospital, my shop remained closed, and the cure period continued. Paper shifted behind me. Eden did not cry loudly. I heard only one breath catch, then another. I kept my eyes on the window. After several minutes, she spoke. He said I don't owe anyone a beautiful version of being sad. I turned halfway. Do you want to tell me more? No. All right. That's all I'm telling. All right. She folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. I did not ask whether Nolan mentioned me. I did not ask whether he mentioned Loretta. I did not ask what advice he left, or whether he knew Eden would one day need it. Eden placed the envelope beneath her pillow. You really aren't going to ask? No. You want to? Yes. Why aren't you? Because wanting to know does not make it mine. She looked at me for a long time. Then she closed her eyes with one hand resting over the pillow. Daniel called the next morning. Claire Benton of Mountain Youth Alliance had agreed to meet with us by video. Miriam joined from her office. I took the call in the hospital consultation room while Eden attended a short occupational therapy session. Claire was 51, with silver beginning at her temples, and a stack of documents already open beside her laptop. Daniel introduced me as acting trustee. Claire corrected the tone immediately. I understand the urgency, she said. Urgency does not allow us to skip child, safety, or financial review. I'm not asking you to take over tomorrow. Good, because we cannot. She explained fiscal sponsorship without pretending it was simple. Mountain Youth Alliance could potentially host a project under its existing nonprofit structure. It could provide payroll, insurance, financial controls, background checks, and governance oversight. Before agreeing, it needed the program budget, staff list, insurance history, safeguarding policies, donor restrictions, contracts, and a clear description of which assets the trust could legally license. We would also need to know what does not transfer, Claire said. We will not accept disputed money, staff obligations, or equipment simply because someone says it belongs to the mission. Nothing should be taken from the Weller Foundation improperly, I said. Then we agree on the first principle. Daniel described the current programs, 12 part-time employees, and the number of enrolled children. He admitted that some activities had drifted from Nolan's original curriculum. Claire asked whether the foundation board had approved the commercial retreat. Daniel said he did not have the authority to answer for the board. Miriam explained the license suspension and the 7-day cure period. She kept the description narrow. No family accusations, no claims about liability for Eden's fall. Claire took notes. What exactly are you asking Mountain Youth Alliance to consider? She asked me. A temporary fiscal sponsorship for the community program if the current license terminates, I said. The trust could issue a new limited license covering the curriculum and marks needed for nonprofit youth activities. Future restricted grants could move only after donor approval and due diligence. Employees could choose whether to apply or transfer after proper notice and background checks. And your role? Trustee for the licensed assets, not executive director. Would your mother remain involved? Not in governance under the proposal. Would you control the replacement governance? No. I want a steering group with parents, volunteers, and people experienced in youth programs. Claire looked directly into the camera. You understand that we may review everything and decline. Yes. You understand 6 days is not enough to complete this. Yes. What do you expect in 6 days? Proof that there is a lawful path that does not require my parents to own Nolan's story. Claire leaned back. That is a narrower request. She agreed to begin an expedited preliminary review. Daniel would send staff and program information. Miriam would prepare a proposed license and asset schedule. I would provide the governance conditions and confirm that Eden's image, medical history, and private letters were excluded from every use. The call opened a review process only. The organization, staff, and donor funds remained where they were until every condition could be checked. When the call ended, Miriam remained on the screen. This may fail, she said. I know. Your parents will say you built a replacement before giving them time to cure. I'm building a bridge in case they refuse. That distinction needs to remain true. It will. I closed the laptop and returned to Eden's room. We did not have 6 days to build a new charity. We had 6 days to prove there was a lawful bridge away from the old one. Eden entered inpatient rehabilitation 10 days after the fall. Her weekly goals were modest. Transfer into a wheelchair with assistance, sit upright for 30 minutes, and complete basic grooming. The first transfer left her sweating. When I moved to adjust her blanket, she stopped me. Ask. I did, and she said yes. Nearly every part of her body had become public to doctors, nurses, therapists, and insurers. Asking, before touching one blanket, was a small piece of control she could keep. When she woke, she found me sorting clean clothes into the low dresser. You folded the shirts wrong, she said. I looked at the stack. They are folded the way I always fold them. I want the camera shirts on top. Why? So I can reach them. I rearranged the drawer. Better. Yes. Her film camera sat inside a padded case on the windowsill. The resort had returned it with the rest of her belongings, but the exposed roll remained inside. Eden had asked me not to develop it until she could decide what she wanted done. For 3 days, she had not mentioned it. That evening, she asked me to bring the camera closer. I placed the case on the tray table. She ran one finger along the cracked leather strap. Did Dad ever break this? He dropped it into a creek once. Eden looked up. He told me it was rain damage. It was creek damage caused by him trying to photograph a frog. He hated frogs. He hated not knowing where they would jump. That sounds more like him. Most public stories about Nolan made him sound patient, fearless, and naturally wise. The man in the foundation videos always knew where the trail went. He always had the correct lesson ready. Children gathered around him while sunrise arranged itself behind his shoulders. The real Nolan had once led 12 people half a mile in the wrong direction because he refused to admit he had turned the map upside down. He got lost on his own trail? Eden asked. More than once. That's impossible. He said the trees looked different from the other direction. That is not how maps work. I told him that. She smiled. It was the first smile I had seen since the fall that did not appear because someone asked whether she felt better. He made terrible pancakes, I continued. I remember. He always burned the first side and left the second side raw. He called them trail cakes. He called everything a trail, something when he wanted you to eat it. Eden rested the camera against her chest. Did he really hate slogans? He once rejected a poster because it said nature heals. Why? He said nature also contains mosquitoes, poison ivy, and falling branches. Eden laughed, then immediately held her abdomen. I stood. Do you need the nurse? No. It just pulled. Do you want me to move the camera? No. Her breathing settled. I like hearing the bad things, she said. The bad things? The things that make him sound like a person. I sat again. For years, I had avoided those memories because they felt too ordinary to compete with death. Loretta wanted photographs of Nolan standing on peaks. Sabrina wanted quotations about courage. Gordon wanted enrollment numbers tied to his curriculum. Eden wanted to know he burned pancakes. The next morning, she handed me the camera. I want the film developed. Do you want me to wait until you can come with me? That could be weeks. I can take it to the lab and bring back the contact sheet. Don't send it somewhere. I won't. And don't let them scan everything. I'll ask for prints and a contact sheet only. She hesitated. Can they look at the pictures? The technician has to process them. I mean anyone else. No one else. Not Miriam? Not unless you choose. Not Daniel? No. Not the insurance people? No. Eden released the camera. There might be nothing useful. It does not have to be useful. She looked at me. I mean, for proving what happened. It still does not have to be useful. I drove to a film lab near the rehabilitation center, while Eden attended occupational therapy. The technician recognized the camera model and asked whether the roll had been exposed to heat or water. It was near a fall at a mountain resort. He looked at the cracked strap. Do you want digital scans? No. Standard prints? Yes. And a contact sheet. He wrote rush processing on the envelope. It will be ready tomorrow afternoon. I paid with the shop debit card, then sat in my car without starting the engine. The account balance was lower than it had been the week before. Leah had emailed that 2 customers canceled restoration orders. The licensing payment had not arrived. Payroll would clear, but only because I had transferred money from savings. Gordon's $75,000 remained available for another 3 days, according to the written offer. I did not reopen it. Refusing the money did not make the bills disappear. It only made them honest. On July 23rd, the cure period ended. Miriam called at 9 in the morning. They did not cure the breach, she said. Did they send anything last night? Gordon submitted a revised proposal at 11:42. The LLC would remove Eden's image and change the public campaign name. The Weller family would retain full governance, and the commercial retreat would continue using Nolan's marks under an expanded fundraising interpretation. That is what they already wanted. Yes. Did they cancel the sublicense? No. Did they accept independent oversight? No. Then what happens? The trust is issuing final termination today. The words felt larger than the room. The license I had signed 5 years earlier would end. Weller Foundation could continue programs that did not use Nolan's photographs, marks, curriculum, or name. Weller Legacy Experiences could operate as a private company under a new identity, but it could not sell anything connected to him. What about the current children's sessions? We are allowing a short administrative wind-down for activities already underway. No new promotional use. Daniel is coordinating with staff so children are not abandoned midweek. And the archive? Remains locked. The merchandise? Must remain off sale. Inventory disposition will be handled under the contract. I looked through the glass wall of the therapy gym. Eden was practicing moving from the wheelchair to a padded bench. Her face was pale, but she raised one hand to stop the therapist before adjusting her position herself. Send it, I said. I will. Miriam paused. Once termination is served, restoring the old arrangement will not be simple. I understand. At 11:17, the final notice went out. Loretta did not call me. Gordon sent one line. "You have chosen an avoidable destruction." Sabrina made the public announcement. The Nolan Hollis Courage Retreat would not continue under that name because of what she described as unresolved private restrictions. Weller Legacy Experiences would launch a new program on August 3rd, focused on leadership, renewal, and outdoor transformation. No Nolan, no Quiet Hour, no Eden. The location remained Pineglass Mountain Resort. "They're still doing it," Eden said when I told her. "They have deposits and contracts." Without Dad? Without permission to use him. She considered that. Will people still go? Some will. So they didn't need his name. They needed what his name made people believe. She looked down at her cast. "What will Grandma do?" "Keep control." The film lab called that afternoon. I brought the envelope back unopened and placed it on Eden's tray. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." "Do you want me to open it?" "No." She worked one finger beneath the paper flap. The effort took longer with one usable hand. I waited without helping. Inside were 36 small prints and a contact sheet. The first images showed the entrance banner, rows of cups, the sponsor lounge, and Nolan's signature printed beneath slogans he had never written. Eden moved through them slowly. Several frames were underexposed. One showed only part of Gordon's shoulder. Another caught Daniel looking away while Sabrina spoke into her headset. Then we reached North Lookout. The first photograph showed the original brass plaque still attached to the wooden display. The second showed the yellow barrier across the maintenance entrance. In the third, the barrier had been moved beside the utility cabinet. The fourth showed the new commercial logo leaning against the old plaque. The fifth captured an employee carrying Nolan's plaque toward the service cart. The final clear image before the fall showed the plaque lying on its side, while the polished logo stood upright behind it. The angle made Nolan's engraved name appear beneath the new sign, partly hidden and almost pressed into the dirt. I felt my breath change. "This proves the barrier moved," I said. Eden looked at me. I stopped. "I'm sorry." She examined the photograph again. "It shows what I saw." "Yes, not what happened after." "No. People will use it like evidence. Only if you allow them to see it." She arranged the prints across the blanket. "Which one would you choose?" she asked. "It isn't my choice." "I'm asking." I looked at the barrier photograph first. It was the strongest factual image. It showed the open path, and the barrier pushed aside. An insurer might want it. A lawyer might call it important. Gordon would call it incomplete. Then I looked at the plaque beside the logo. "That one," I said. "Why?" "Because it shows what they thought mattered." Eden held it closer. "It doesn't show me." "No, it doesn't show the hospital." "No, it doesn't show anyone being mean. It does not need to." She placed the photograph apart from the others. "That's the one." "For what?" "If I decide to say something." "What do you want to say?" "I don't know yet." I gathered the remaining prints only after she nodded. We placed them in the envelope and stored them with the camera. The photograph she chose remained on the tray. 2 days later, Sabrina requested a visit. Her message came through me because the rehabilitation center would not provide Eden's room or schedule. I showed Eden the request. "You can say no." "I know. You do not owe her a meeting." "I know. Do you want me in the room?" "Near the door." Sabrina arrived carrying no flowers and no camera. A staff member escorted her to a shared family room near the therapy wing. Eden sat in her wheelchair with a cushion behind her back. The cast covered her left wrist to the base of her fingers. Sabrina stopped when she saw her. For a second, the performance left her face. "You look..." She did not finish. "Like I fell?" Eden asked. Sabrina placed her bag on a chair. I was going to say tired. I am. I sat near the door, as Eden requested. Sabrina pulled another chair closer but did not sit until Eden told her she could. I came because what your mother has done is affecting more than our family, Sabrina said. Eden looked toward me. I kept my face still. 12 employees may lose their jobs, Sabrina continued. Children may lose programs they depend on. Sponsors are pulling back because the license was terminated. Why are you telling me? Because your mother listens to you. Eden's right hand tightened on the wheelchair armrest. She didn't before. Sabrina glanced at me. That is not fair. Eden waited. Sabrina returned her attention to her. The retreat was designed to fund free access for children who cannot afford these experiences. How much were the cabins? That is not the point. $4,800 for the cheapest package. Sabrina's eyebrows lifted. Who showed you that? Does it matter? The higher prices allowed us to subsidize. Did the children need cocktail receptions? No. VIP cabins? Guests expect appropriate value. Professional content packages? That was marketing. Pictures of me talking about Dad? You were part of the story. I didn't want to be. Sabrina folded her hands. You are treating visibility as exploitation because you are angry. Every nonprofit tells stories. People give when they connect emotionally. Then tell your story. I have. You told mine. I was trying to show that grief does not have to end someone's life. It almost ended mine. Sabrina's eyes flicked toward my face. That is exactly the kind of line people will take out of context. Eden leaned back against the cushion. I didn't say it for people. The foundation gave your father's work a future. Dad already had a future. He was dead, Eden. The room became silent. Sabrina closed her eyes. I did not mean it like that. How did you mean it? I mean, work disappears if no one maintains it. Grandma built something that helps people. And that means you can use me? It means sometimes being part of a family mission requires accepting that everything cannot be private. Eden looked down at her cast. Did you write the post because of the mission? Sabrina's mouth tightened. I was frustrated. You knew I was in surgery. I knew you were being treated. Mom told you I was bleeding inside. Your mother uses the worst possible language when she panics. She copied what the doctor said. I deleted the post. After people saw it. I made a mistake. You called it a joke when Grandpa offered Mom money. Sabrina looked sharply at me. You told her about the settlement? It was about Eden, I said. It was an adult proposal. Eden raised her voice for the first time. Stop saying that when you want adults to decide what happened to me. Sabrina stared at her. Then she used the same weapon she had used for 6 months. You have always known how to make everything center on you. Eden did not flinch. I was the only person asking not to be seen. Sabrina had no campaign language for that. She stood. I came here to repair this. No, Eden said. You came to make me help you. Sabrina lifted her bag. At some point, you will understand that protecting other children required compromises. Then why were all the compromises mine? Sabrina looked toward me. You are letting a 14-year-old control decisions she cannot understand. I am letting her answer questions about her own story. You will regret building a legal and financial crisis around a teenager's feelings. I opened the door. The visit is over. Sabrina left without touching Eden or apologizing for the post. Afterward, Eden asked to return to her room. The meeting had lasted 23 minutes. She slept for the rest of the afternoon. The next morning, she asked about the August 3rd launch. Is it on the broken platform? No. The upper section is still closed. The resort says the lower terrace will be inspected before any event. Will Grandma speak? Yes. Will donors be there? Probably. What is Mountain Youth Alliance doing? Reviewing the program. Nothing is final. Will Dad's plaque be there? Miriam still has it. Eden looked toward the photograph on her tray. I want to go. My first answer almost came automatically. No. She saw it on my face before I spoke. I'm not walking. You are still in rehabilitation. I know. The drive is long. I know. You get tired after 20 minutes in the therapy gym. I know. I closed my mouth. What do you want to do there? I asked. Say that they don't have permission to use me. We can send a written statement. They'll call it yours. They may call anything yours. I want them to see me say it. That could turn you into the thing you don't want to be. A story? A spectacle. I decide if I go. You decide whether you want to go. The doctors decide whether it is medically safe. She considered that distinction. Ask them. Dr. Park spoke with the rehabilitation team that afternoon. They did not approve the trip immediately. Eden would have to remain stable through the next week. She would travel by accessible medical transport. The visit could not exceed 90 minutes. She could not stand for photographs, transfer to a stage chair, or use crutches. Medication had to remain on schedule. A quiet room had to be available if her concussion symptoms worsened. If you become dizzy, nauseated, confused, or more painful, the visit ends, Dr. Park said. Eden nodded. This is not permission to prove you are better, Doctor. Park continued. You are not better yet. I know. Why is attending important? Eden looked toward me. I did not answer. They keep telling people what Dad would want, she said. I want to ask Grandma something while she is standing next to the place where I fell. What? Eden's right hand moved toward the photograph. I'm still deciding how to say it. That evening, she wrote a short statement in a notebook. She did not let me edit it. She wrote that no one had permission to use her image or grief. She wrote that the quiet hour should return because children should not have to perform pain for adults. She wrote that a program could help people without turning them into proof. Then she closed the notebook. Eden did not want a speech. She wanted to ask Loretta one question no campaign language could answer. The first official notice from Pineglass arrived 1 week before the launch. The upper platform at North Lookout would remain closed under the county inspector's order. Temporary fencing now surrounded the broken section, and no guest, employee, vendor, or event representative could enter it. The lower stone terrace and the lawn beside it had been inspected separately. They were structurally sound, accessible by a paved service road, and approved for the August 3rd event. Pineglass also gave Weller Legacy Experiences a written restriction. The company could use the lower terrace. It could not advertise the event as taking place on the original North Lookout platform, suggest the damaged area had reopened, or place guests behind the safety fencing for photographs. The notice included a map showing the permitted event boundary and the wheelchair route from the service parking area. I sent the map to Eden's rehabilitation team. She enlarged it on my tablet. The broken part will still be there? She asked. Behind the fence. Will I see it? Probably. She handed the tablet back. Good. I waited for her to explain. She did not. The resort's insurance representative remained in contact with me about the medical payment provision and the continuing incident review. No one had decided liability. No one offered a settlement. The county had not completed its investigation into the failed supports. Those processes stayed in the background where they belonged. 2 days later, Claire completed Mountain Youth Alliance's preliminary review. Fiscal sponsorship remained conditional on a new nonprofit-only trust license, minimum funding, independent financial control, and proper screening and notice for any staff or volunteers who chose to transfer. No foundation, property, or obligations would move automatically, and an independent nonprofit remained a future possibility rather than a promise. Daniel reported that several workers and volunteers wanted information. Claire repeated that the project might continue in a different form and would not become a weapon against my parents. The bridge was credible because it had limits. How many agreed? 11 so far. What about the others? 2 want to wait. One says he is staying with Loretta. That is his choice. Daniel was quiet. I should have given people choices earlier. So should I. The Foundation's largest institutional donor requested a meeting the next morning. The representative did not begin by asking about the poolside post. She asked for the termination notice, the proposed fiscal sponsorship, the current program budget, and the sections of the old license covering commercial use. Miriam provided only documents the trust was authorized to share. The representative asked Daniel how many children were currently enrolled and whether any session would end without supervision. No, he said. The active week will be completed. Future sessions may pause during the transition. She asked me whether I expected the donor to choose between my family and me. No. What do you expect? That you decide whether the commercial retreat matches the purpose of your grant. The representative looked down at her notes. Our funding was restricted to youth access, instructor training, and transportation. It was not approved for luxury guest packages or commercial media production. Did the foundation use your grant for those things? I asked. We are reviewing that separately. I am not making an allegation today. She spoke with the caution of someone whose words could affect employees, donors, and future audits. Then she described what the donor was prepared to do. It would not provide further support to the commercial retreat. The next restricted grant for the youth program would remain inside the donor's own accounts while Mountain Youth Alliance completed due diligence. If the fiscal sponsorship agreement was signed, the trust issued an approved license, and the program met the donor's financial conditions, the future grant could be directed to Mountain Youth Alliance for the project. The grant would remain frozen through the launch and could move only after the written conditions were satisfied, not because anyone gave an emotional speech. Is that enough for Claire's operating minimum? I asked. If all conditions are met, it would cover most of it. Most was not all. The representative continued. We are not supporting you because you are Nolan's widow. We are considering the project because its proposed controls match the charitable purpose we originally funded. That is what I want. Your parents will say we abandoned their organization during a project our charitable purpose we originally funded. Crisis. What will you say? That the commercial retreat falls outside our grant purpose. The meeting ended without celebration. I walked back to Eden's room carrying a possible future, not a victory. She was sitting in her wheelchair beside the window, practicing fastening the buttons on one of her camera shirts with her right hand. How did it go? She asked. The donor may support the program through Mountain Youth Alliance. May? They have conditions. So they didn't pick us. They picked rules. Eden worked another button through its hole. That sounds better. The Weller family announced the new retreat name that evening. Summit Forward. Sabrina's campaign removed Nolan's photograph and every direct reference to the Quiet Hour. The new logo showed 3 overlapping mountain peaks. A video featured Loretta walking through Pineglass with Gordon and Sabrina. Loretta spoke about carrying forward the lessons of a beloved outdoor educator whose work had inspired their family. She did not say Nolan's name. She did not need to. The camera showed familiar trail maps in the background. Sabrina used phrases taken from his old curriculum without putting quotation marks around them. Gordon described the retreat as the next evolution of a community mission built through years of sacrifice. The 3 of them became the center of the new story. Loretta was the grieving founder. Gordon was the practical builder. Sabrina was the daughter, leading the mission into the future. They did not accuse one another. They did not separate after the suspension. They stood together beneath the new logo and treated their unity as proof that I was the problem. Miriam watched the video once. They removed the registered name, she said. They did not remove all licensed material. What remains? 2 curriculum phrases. 1 photograph has been cropped, so the original Nolan image is no longer visible, but it is still a trust-owned composition. The trail exercise they advertise comes directly from his lesson plan. Can they be stopped? I can send a limitation notice. Will that cancel the launch? No. It requires them to remove the remaining protected material. They can continue under their own name with their own program. Then, send it. The revised website appeared the following afternoon. The curriculum phrases were gone. The photograph had been replaced. The trail exercise became a general leadership walk with no connection to Nolan's lesson plan. Each correction made the retreat less like the work they claimed to be protecting. Gordon sent Miriam a formal response. Weller Legacy Experiences would comply with the restrictions while preserving all available contractual rights. He also stated that the company had accepted deposits, guaranteed a block of resort rooms, rented production equipment, and signed vendor contracts based on the August 3rd date. Canceling would trigger refunds and cancellation costs. Gordon had personally guaranteed part of the room block and equipment agreement. He was not continuing because he believed the retreat could still save Nolan's legacy. He was continuing because stopping would cost him money. Sabrina rebuilt the campaign around the Weller family's resilience. The new promotional copy said they had refused to let a painful private dispute destroy years of service. Loretta approved it. None of them apologized to Eden. 2 days before the launch, Loretta sent a voice message to her. She did not send it to me. She used the family number the rehabilitation center allowed for screened personal messages. A staff member asked whether Eden wanted to receive it. Eden looked at me. What does she say? I don't know. Did you listen? No. Can I decide later? Yes. The message remained unheard for 3 hours. After afternoon therapy, Eden asked for my phone. I want you here when I play it, she said. I sat beside the wheelchair. Loretta's voice filled the room. Eden, sweetheart, I miss you more than I can explain. I know you are angry, and I know adults have made decisions you do not understand yet. Everything I have done since your father died has been to protect what he gave the world. There are children who need these programs. There are families depending on us. I hope, when you feel stronger, you will think about them. And remember that love sometimes requires us to see beyond our own pain. I would give anything to hold you. Grandma loves you. The message ended. Loretta had said she missed Eden. She had said she loved her. She had said children depended on the program. She had not said she chose the sponsor preview after learning Eden needed surgery. She had not said she stayed at the pool. She had not named Sabrina's post. She had not asked what Eden needed. Do you want to answer? I asked. No. Do you want me to tell her you heard it? No. Do you want the message deleted? Eden thought for a moment. Keep it. Why? So I don't start remembering it differently. I saved the message without forwarding it to anyone. Loretta sent me a text an hour later. Did she listen? I showed Eden. Do you want me to answer? She shook her head. I placed the phone face down. A week earlier, I might have told Loretta Eden needed time. I might have softened the silence so my mother would not feel rejected. This time, I did not translate my daughter's choice. On August 1st, Dr. Park and the rehabilitation team approved the trip. The permission came with written limits. Eden would travel in an accessible medical vehicle with a trained driver and a rehabilitation aide. The van allowed her chair to recline, and the route included a scheduled rest and symptom check. She could remain at the terrace for no more than 90 minutes. Travel time was separate, and her medication schedule could not change. If she became dizzy, confused, nauseated, unusually pale, or more painful, we would leave immediately. The center helped me prepare a transfer plan. Eden would not need to leave the wheelchair at Pineglass. A pressure relief cushion would protect her pelvis. We packed a second support cushion, water, medication, a light blanket, and an emergency contact sheet. Pineglass reserved a quiet guest room near the lower terrace in case Eden needed darkness and silence before the van could depart. I reviewed the route from the service parking area to the event lawn. No stairs, no gravel, no access to the closed platform. I checked everything twice. Because the donor representative had requested clarification before deciding future support, she formally listed Miriam, Claire, Eden, and me as invited observers. Pineglass confirmed our access to the lower terrace and required us to stay within the inspected event boundary. Eden watched from the bed. "You're packing for a month," she said. "I'm packing for 90 minutes. You have 3 blankets. One is thin. I need one." I removed 2. She left Nolan's private letter in the locked drawer assigned to her room. "You don't want to bring it?" I asked. "No." "Are you sure?" "It isn't for them." She packed only the photograph she had selected from the film roll. The brass plaque remained with Miriam. She would bring it in a padded case with a simple receipt showing it had left the trust's custody for the event and would return afterward. "It isn't evidence in a criminal case," Miriam said when she showed me the form. "The receipt only records where trust property is." "Does Eden need to sign?" "No. You sign as trustee. She decides whether it is displayed." I signed. The night before the launch, Eden asked whether I thought Loretta would change her mind when she saw her. "I don't know." She screamed when she read Dad's letter. "Yes, that didn't change her." "No. What if she cries tomorrow?" "You decide whether you want to listen. What if everyone watches?" "We can leave." "What if I want to stay?" "We stay until the medical limit." Eden looked toward the photograph on her bedside table. "I don't want people clapping because I'm in a wheelchair." "I won't ask them to." "Sabrina might." "She does not control whether we remain. Don't push me into the middle unless I say." "I won't." "And if I say I'm tired, don't ask me to finish." "I won't." She studied my face. "Okay." The accessible van arrived before sunrise on August 3rd. Eden wore a loose white shirt beneath a light jacket. Her cast remained visible. She placed the photograph inside a flat protective sleeve on her lap. The driver secured the wheelchair at 4 points. I sat beside her. We left the private letter behind. As the road climbed toward Pineglass, the mountains appeared through bands of morning cloud. Eden watched the trees without speaking. Near the resort entrance, she closed her eyes. "Do you want to turn around?" I asked. "No." "You can. I know." The van stopped in the service area, below the lower terrace. Daniel waited beside the accessible path. He did not open the vehicle door until the driver gave permission. Claire had arrived separately, but remained near the donor group. She had not come to announce a completed sponsorship. She had come to answer questions about the proposed memorandum if asked. Miriam stood near the lawn, holding the padded plaque case. The upper platform rose behind the terrace. Bright construction fencing surrounded the broken section. A county closure notice hung where the yellow barrier had once been moved for the camera. No one could pretend the platform had reopened. On the safe lawn below it, rows of chairs faced a low stage. A new mountain logo stood beneath a dark cloth. Loretta waited beside the microphone. Gordon spoke with a resort representative near the vendor table. Sabrina adjusted the position of a camera operator and pointed toward the covered logo. They had prepared a launch without Nolan's name. Eden remained in the van while the driver checked the route, and Daniel confirmed the quiet room was ready. "I'll go ahead with Miriam," I told her. "You come out only when you say." Eden tightened her hand around the photograph. "Don't let them start using the plaque before I get there." "They won't." Miriam opened the padded case. The brass plaque was still bent. I lifted it with both hands and carried it toward the lower terrace. Loretta stepped up to the microphone. She had prepared a speech about moving forward. Then she looked beyond the chairs and saw me standing beside Miriam with Nolan's damaged plaque in my hands. Her first word never reached the microphone. For several seconds, Loretta did not move. She stared at the bent brass plaque in my hands, then at the temporary fence surrounding the platform where Eden had fallen. For a moment, the smile she had prepared for the cameras disappeared. Sabrina followed her gaze. She left the covered logo and crossed the stage before the guests could notice the silence. "You cannot bring that into our launch," she said. The plaque belongs to the trust. This event has nothing to do with the trust. Then it should not matter that Nolan's name is here. Gordon approached from the side of the terrace. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes moved quickly between Miriam, the plaque, the donor representatives, and the accessible van still parked beyond the lawn. You were invited to observe, not to take over the launch, he said. I am not asking to join your program. Then why bring the plaque? To return something your launch tried to throw away. Several guests turned toward us. No one shouted or rushed closer. Most remained seated, uncertain whether the interruption was part of the presentation. Loretta took the microphone from its stand. This morning was supposed to mark a new beginning, she said. Unfortunately, one grieving member of our family has chosen to bring a private conflict into a public mission. She did not say my name. She did not say Eden's. She spoke about years of work, hundreds of children, frightened parents, and volunteers who had given their weekends to help families rebuild after loss. She said the Weller family had refused to let anger, misunderstanding, or personal ownership destroy something larger than any one person. I listened while holding the plaque. The language was familiar because I had used versions of it myself. Every time Eden objected, I reminded her of the other children. Every time Loretta crossed a boundary, I defended the good work surrounding it. My mother had turned the mission into a shield so often that she no longer seemed able to see what stood behind it. Gordon moved to a second microphone. Summit Forward was created to make community programs financially sustainable, he said. Free youth activities require insurance, trained staff, transportation, equipment, and facilities. Those costs do not disappear because some people are uncomfortable with how funding is raised. He pointed toward the lodge and cabins. The commercial retreat allows paying guests to support opportunities for children who could never afford access on their own. A few guests nodded. Gordon did not mention that the least expensive package cost more than many families earned in a month. He did not mention personal guarantees, room blocks, or the cancellation fees waiting if the launch failed. He made the retreat sound like the only bridge between wealthy guests and grieving children. Sabrina returned to the covered logo. One hand rested on the cloth. This campaign is no longer connected to any disputed name or archive, she said. Today is about our family continuing the work in our own way. She looked directly at me. If Mara wishes to pursue private contractual complaints, she has channels available. This is not one of them. I carried the plaque toward the low display stand Miriam and Daniel had prepared beside the chairs. No one stopped me. I did not bring the full license. I did not carry the cure notices, the archive lists, the storyboard, or Gordon's offer. Turning the terrace into a courtroom would have allowed my family to hide inside procedure. I placed the plaque on the stand. Daniel set an empty frame beside it, but he did not place Eden's photograph there yet. Loretta's fingers tightened around the microphone. What are you trying to prove? 3 things. I faced the guests rather than the cameras. The old license ended because the violations were not corrected within the cure period. Eden never gave anyone permission to sell her name, image, grief, or relationship with her father. Mountain Youth Alliance is reviewing a lawful transition so the community program can continue without a commercial company controlling Nolan's work. That is still a conditional plan. Not an operating program, Gordon said. Yes, I replied. The conditions are why Claire and the donor are here. Then you have brought an unfinished alternative to compete with an operating business. Claire Benton rose from a chair near the donor group. Mountain Youth Alliance has completed its preliminary review, she said. We are prepared to sign a memorandum of understanding if the trust issues an approved license, minimum funding is confirmed, and staff complete our employment and safeguarding process. She did not come to stand beside me. She did not say she believed my account of the accident. She described conditions. The project is not active today, Claire continued. No employees, funds, or foundation assets have transferred. We are confirming that a legitimate path exists. The donor representative stood next. Our future grant remains under internal restriction while due diligence continues, she said. No money has moved. We will not fund the commercial retreat. If the fiscal sponsorship is completed and the program satisfies our requirements, we intend to consider directing the restricted youth grant through Mountain Youth Alliance. Loretta looked at the representative. You made that decision without speaking to me. We reviewed the purpose of our grant and the commercial materials submitted to us. I built the program you funded. We funded youth access. We did not fund luxury lodging, private media packages, or a commercial retreat. The representative sat down. No one applauded. The absence of applause made the answer stronger. This was not a crowd choosing a winner. It was an institution naming what its money had been meant to support. A movement near the service road drew my attention. The accessible van door had opened. Eden sat inside with the photograph resting in its protective sleeve across her lap. The driver checked the wheelchair restraints one final time. A rehabilitation aide stood beside her. I walked back to the van. You do not have to come out, I said. I know. We can leave now. I know. Do you want me to push you onto the terrace? Eden looked past me at Loretta, Gordon, and Sabrina. Yes. The driver released the chair. I placed my hands on the grips but did not move until Eden nodded. We followed the paved route onto the lawn. Conversations stopped one by one. Several people stood, then seemed unsure what to do. No one began clapping. No music played. Sabrina did not call the photographer forward. Eden wore no makeup and no foundation shirt. Her left wrist remained covered by the cast. A cushion supported her pelvis, and the blanket over her legs hid the straps, keeping her safely positioned. She looked tired before we reached the first row. I stopped beside the quiet room entrance. Still okay? For now. Do you want to go closer? Yes. I pushed her to the low stand holding Nolan's plaque. Daniel approached, but waited. Eden lifted the protected photograph with her right hand. You can put it there, she told him. Daniel placed it in the empty frame. The image showed the old brass plaque lying on its side beside the new commercial logo. Nolan's name was partly hidden. The polished sign stood upright behind it. There was no injured child in the photograph. No blood. No hospital room. Only a choice about which object deserved to remain standing. Sabrina looked at the image. That photograph does not show the full context. It shows what I chose to photograph, Eden said. She glanced at me. I stepped back. Eden spoke toward Loretta, not the cameras. My dad made the quiet hour because children shouldn't have to perform how they feel. Her voice was quiet. People leaned forward to hear, but no one asked her to repeat herself. He said we could sit there without talking, smiling, or telling anyone why we were sad. She paused and adjusted her right hand on the wheelchair arm. I didn't give permission for my name, my pictures, or what happened to Dad to be sold. I don't want the community program to end. I want it to continue without making kids into content. That was all she had written. I did not add an explanation. I did not tell the guests how close she had come to dying or show them the poolside post. I did not describe the months of rehabilitation ahead. Eden had spoken. My job was not to improve her words. Loretta descended from the stage. You do not understand what your father wanted, she said. Eden's face remained still. Loretta stopped several feet from the wheelchair. Nolan wanted his work to grow. He wanted more children reached. He knew that a small program could not survive on ideals alone. He didn't want cameras in the quiet hour. That was when the program served 20 children. We now serve hundreds. Then why did you remove the part he made? We adapted it. You removed it because sponsors couldn't see anything. Loretta looked at Daniel. He did not deny it. My mother turned back to Eden. Your father trusted me to build something lasting. Did he trust you to use me? He trusted our family. That isn't an answer. Loretta's eyes shone, but no tears fell. You have been told that control is a bad word. Someone has to make decisions. Someone has to raise money, choose staff, negotiate with resorts, and stand in front when things go wrong. You didn't stand in front when I fell. A small sound moved through the audience and stopped. Loretta's voice lowered. We believed you were receiving the best possible care. You knew I was in surgery. You had your mother. And you had the launch. Loretta looked at me. This is what you wanted. No, I said. I wanted you to make a different choice before Eden had to come here. Eden shifted against the cushion. Her face had become paler. I leaned closer. Do you need the quiet room? Not yet. Tell me when. She nodded, then looked at Loretta again. Do you want his name, or do you want control? No one spoke. The question was not about the plaque alone. It reached backward through every meeting, campaign, sponsor, dinner, and excuse my mother had made. Loretta could keep a connection to Nolan's program. She could support the Independent Community Project as a donor. She could attend events without directing them. She could accept governance that included parents, volunteers, youth safety professionals, and people outside the Weller family. What she could not keep was exclusive authority over Nolan's name. Miriam stepped forward. These were the two paths described in the cure notice, she said. The Weller Foundation may support the community program under independent governance and retain a non-operating donor role. The alternative is for Weller Legacy Experiences to continue its private retreat without the Nolan Hollis marks, archive, curriculum, photographs, or any claim that it represents his estate. Gordon came down from the stage. The first option is not support, he said. It removes us from management while transferring donor relationships to another organization. No donor has been transferred, Claire said. Not yet. You were given the opportunity to separate the LLC from the nonprofit program, Miriam said. You declined. Gordon turned toward Loretta. We have contracts today. Room blocks, production equipment, vendors, refunds. The LLC cannot survive if we walk away from the launch. Sabrina joined them. And no brand survives if other people control every word we are allowed to say. You can build your own brand, I said. Without the story that created the audience, she replied. The sentence exposed more than anger would have. Sabrina did not say they needed Nolan's curriculum to help children. She said they needed his story to keep the audience. Loretta looked toward the covered logo. Behind it waited the name, Summit Forward. Their new company still had deposits, contracts, cameras, and guests. It had everything they had built except the one name that made people believe the project carried Nolan's approval. My mother looked at the plaque. Then she looked at Eden. We will continue without his name, she said. Her voice was steady. We will not surrender a functioning organization to outsiders. We will honor what we learned from Nolan through our own work, under our own identity. She chose control. No one gasped. No music stopped because none had begun. The decision settled over the terrace through silence. Daniel moved from the volunteer section and stood beside Claire. I intend to transition to the sponsored project if the agreement is completed, he said. I will finish my current obligations properly. I will not continue with the commercial retreat. Several volunteers stood after him. One woman said she would complete Mountain Youth Alliance's screening process. Another said she would wait for the final agreement before deciding. A third remained seated beside the Weller staff. No one was forced to choose instantly. The donor representative repeated that her organization would not fund Summit Forward and would consider the future youth grant only after every condition of the fiscal sponsorship had been met. Guests began speaking quietly among themselves. A man near the aisle raised his hand. I paid a deposit because this was presented as connected to Nolan Hollis, he said. Who handles refunds? Gordon answered before anyone else could. The retreat remains valid under its new name. Our guest services team will discuss individual concerns. Another woman asked whether the private photography package would still include archive locations. Sabrina said the schedule had been revised. The woman asked for a copy of the refund policy. There was no mass revolt. Most guests stayed in their chairs, watching the people on the stage calculate what the new truth would cost. A Pine Glass representative approached Gordon with a folder. "The resort remains bound to the room, block and production agreement," she said quietly. "Any cancellation or reduction will be handled under the contract." Gordon's face changed only slightly. He had personally guaranteed part of those obligations. The consequences had not arrived yet, but I saw him understand that the launch could fail without making the bills disappear. Sabrina returned to the covered logo. Her hand touched the cloth. This was the moment she had planned for photographs. She was supposed to reveal Summit Forward, while Loretta spoke about resilience, and guests applauded the family's new beginning. She did not pull it away. The covered sign remained behind them, like an answer no one wanted to display. Loretta walked toward Eden. "You have destroyed this family," she said. I moved closer, but did not place myself between them, unless Eden asked. Eden's breathing had become shallow with fatigue. "You chose this before I got here," she said. Loretta looked at me. "You brought an injured child to make us look cruel. She asked to come. You should have protected her from this." "I protected her right to decide. She does not understand the consequences." Eden's right hand moved toward the wheelchair brake. "I understand that you stayed at the pool." Loretta flinched. "You know nothing about what I was carrying that day." "You knew what I was carrying." Her eyes moved to the bent plaque. I checked the time. We had 12 minutes before the limit set by the rehabilitation team, but Eden's color told me we should not use them. "Do you want to leave?" I asked. "Yes." "Now." "Yes." I turned the wheelchair. Daniel reached for the plaque. Eden stopped me. "Don't put it back there today." No one had suggested reinstalling it, but I understood what she meant. The terrace still held cameras, sponsor chairs, branded materials, and a covered logo. Reattaching Nolan's name there would turn the correction into another performance. Miriam placed the plaque back inside its padded case. "It returns to the trust," she said. Daniel removed Eden's photograph from the frame and handed it to her. We followed the accessible path toward the van. No one applauded as we left. That was what Eden wanted. Inside the vehicle, the driver secured the wheelchair. I gave Eden water and checked the medication schedule. Her right hand shook as she returned the photograph to its sleeve. "Did I stay too long?" she asked. "No, we are leaving early." "Did Grandma choose control?" "Yes." "Did she understand the question?" "Yes." Eden closed her eyes. The van carried us away from North Lookout while the launch continued behind us. Loretta, Gordon, and Sabrina still had a company. They still had a covered logo, paying guests, vendor contracts, and a resort expecting payment. They had not been arrested. They had not lost every asset in one afternoon. By sunset, they no longer had the one name that had made any of it matter. 8 months after Eden fell through the platform, she could walk from our kitchen to the front porch without assistance. On good days, she crossed the distance slowly and carried her own cup in her right hand. On difficult days, pain returned deep in her pelvis, and she stopped beside the counter until it passed. Cold weather made the ache worse. Her wrist had healed well enough for ordinary tasks, but it still stiffened during physical therapy. The abdominal scar had faded from red to pale pink. She no longer needed a wheelchair inside the house, though we kept one folded in the garage for places that required more walking than her body could manage. She had not returned to a long trail. The rehabilitation team no longer described her progress in weeks. Recovery had become a collection of smaller measurements. 10 more minutes on the stationary bike, 1 flight of stairs without stopping. A school day completed without needing the nurse's office. A night without waking from the sound of cracking wood. The first time a medical helicopter passed above our neighborhood, Eden dropped the bowl she was carrying. It struck the kitchen floor and broke into 3 pieces. She stood over it with both hands pressed against the counter, breathing as though the aircraft were still carrying her away from Pine Glass. I moved toward her and stopped. "Do you want me close?" She nodded. I stood beside her without touching until the sound disappeared. Another time, a contractor replacing boards on our neighbor's porch pulled a nail from old wood. The sharp crack made Eden freeze halfway down our front steps. Neither moment meant she had lost all progress. Neither disappeared because someone told her she was safe. Her body remembered what adults kept trying to reduce to a misunderstanding. My shop survived, but not in its old form. I sold the smaller press that had handled custom stationery and short memorial runs. It was the least essential machine, though losing it meant turning away several kinds of work I had once accepted. I reduced the shop hours and moved the restoration table closer to the front windows so I could work while keeping the public area open. Leah stayed, but only 4 days a week until our orders became steady again. There was no anonymous donation. No wealthy stranger paid the hospital balance. The insurer covered most of the surgery and emergency care after the deductible and coinsurance. Pineglass's medical payment provision covered part of the remaining immediate expenses without resolving the larger question of responsibility. I used most of my savings for rehabilitation gaps, transportation, and changes to the house. The temporary ramp remained beside the porch. It was not beautiful. It was useful. Customers returned gradually. A local historical society hired me to restore a set of flood-damaged family albums. A school ordered hand-bound journals for a writing program. Parents connected to the new youth project began bringing old photographs and damaged books to the shop because they knew what I did, not because they believed buying something would rescue us. Real work did not arrive in one dramatic check. It came in invoices, deposits, and evenings spent cleaning glue from my hands. By March, Mountain Youth Alliance had signed the fiscal sponsorship agreement. The process took months, not days. Claire Benton's staff reviewed the budget, insurance records, employment files, safety procedures, donor restrictions, and every item the trust proposed to license. Several policies had to be rewritten. 2 former employees chose not to apply. One failed to complete the required background check process and did not join. 7 part-time employees transferred under new contracts. 9 volunteers completed new screening and training. Daniel became program coordinator, but he did not receive unchecked control. He reported to Mountain Youth Alliance and to a steering committee that included 2 parents, a child development specialist, a volunteer representative, Claire's finance director, and 1 youth safety advisor. I held 1 seat only when the committee discussed trust-owned material. I did not chair it. I did not control its budget. Miriam administered the new license for the quiet hour and selected Nolan materials. Any new use required written review. Children's photographs could not be used beyond limited program documentation without separate permission. No child could be asked to tell a grief story for fundraising. The steering committee was preparing to form an independent nonprofit, but the application, bylaws, board recruitment, and tax-exempt process were still underway. Claire refused to let anyone describe it as complete. "We have a functioning project under sponsorship," she said at the first public meeting. "We do not yet have an independent organization." That sentence did not excite donors. It made me trust her. The future grant moved only after the agreement was signed and the donor completed its final review. The money went to Mountain Youth Alliance for restricted program expenses. It did not enter my account or the trust. The trust issued the license. The fiscal sponsor controlled the funds. The steering committee reviewed the program. No one person could turn Nolan's name into a private kingdom again, including me. Weller Legacy Experiences did not collapse on the terrace that August. Its failure took weeks. Several Summit Forward guests requested refunds after learning the retreat no longer had any connection to Nolan's estate or archive. Others attended the shortened event and later disputed parts of what had been promised in the original package. The company still owed the resort for the guaranteed room block and production equipment. Vendors charged cancellation or reduction fees under their contracts. Miriam received copies of the final commercial settlement documents because they included releases concerning the trust's marks. Gordon's personal guarantees covered part of the unpaid obligations. He sold the family's recreational vehicle and his membership stake in a private resort club. He did not lose his house. He did not declare bankruptcy. No one was arrested. The financial consequences came from agreements he had chosen to sign, not from a punishment I invented. Weller Family Outdoor Foundation continued to exist. It held a few general grants unrelated to Nolan, and sponsored 2 small community events under its own name. It could no longer advertise itself as the official home of Nolan Hollis's work. It could not use the quiet hour, his curriculum, photographs, quotations, or Eden's story. Loretta lost the title that had mattered most to her. She could still call herself founder of the Weller Foundation. She could not call herself guardian of Nolan's legacy or speak on behalf of his estate. Gordon no longer managed any program licensed under Nolan's name. Sabrina lost the documentary project, the commercial campaign, and several production contracts that depended on archive access. The poolside post continued to appear whenever potential partners searched her name. Some people accepted her explanation that it had been written during a stressful family crisis. Others did not. The 3 of them remained united. They never publicly blamed one another for the failed retreat. Loretta said I had overreacted. Gordon said the license dispute had destroyed a workable financial model. Sabrina said a private family conflict had been manipulated by people who did not understand nonprofit storytelling. They changed their language. They did not change their explanation. In February, Loretta requested a meeting with Eden. She sent the request in writing through me, and said she would accept any location, time limit, or supervision Eden required. I gave Eden the message without recommending an answer. She read it after physical therapy and set it beside her water bottle. Do I have to decide today? No. Do you think I should see her? That is your choice. What do you think? I think seeing her may hurt. I think refusing may hurt too. Neither answer makes you cruel. Eden looked toward the window. I want to know if she can say it now. Say what? What she chose. The meeting took place in a community room at the public library. Eden chose the location because it had wide windows, no foundation photographs, and a door she could leave through without passing Loretta's chair. She allowed 1 hour. I sat near the back of the room. Loretta arrived alone. She carried no gifts, documents, or camera. She looked smaller without a microphone or a sponsor banner behind her. Eden sat across from her at a round table. For several seconds, neither spoke. Loretta began with the accident. I am sorry everything got so far out of control. Eden waited. Loretta continued. We were all under enormous pressure that weekend. The sponsor preview had taken years to plan. Your fall happened quickly, and there were conflicting reports about how serious the injuries were. Mom told you I was bleeding inside. I know that now. You read the message. Loretta looked down at her hands. Yes, you knew then. We had been told the helicopter was standard mountain protocol. Your grandfather believed the doctors were being cautious. After Mom said I needed surgery? By then, the situation at the resort had become chaotic. Eden did not rescue her from the silence that followed. Loretta tried again. I am sorry for the post. Sabrina was upset and used words she should never have used. Did you tell her to take it down? Not immediately. Did you leave the pool? No. Loretta's eyes filled. I was grieving too, Eden. Every decision about that program felt connected to your father. I believed I was protecting the one thing I still had from him. You had me. I know. You had Mom. I know that too. But you chose the launch. Loretta pressed her lips together. I chose what I believed would protect the program and the families depending on it. Eden leaned forward slightly. What did you choose? Loretta looked toward me. I did not speak. She turned back to Eden. I chose responsibility during a confusing situation. That isn't what I asked. I chose not to let years of work collapse because of one terrible day. What did you choose? Loretta's voice became strained. I made a decision under pressure that I deeply regret. Eden waited. My mother could have said it. I chose the launch over you. The sentence required no legal confession. It did not require her to accept every version of the accident or agree with the termination. It required her to name the person she had placed second. Loretta could not do it. I never stopped loving you, she said. Eden looked down at her hands. You still haven't said it. Loretta began to cry. She apologized for the distance, the anger, the public statements, and the pain that followed. She spoke about grief, pressure, miscommunication, and how quickly a family could lose sight of one another. Eden listened until the hour ended. She did not forgive her. When we returned to the car, she sat in the passenger seat without fastening the belt. I waited. I miss her sometimes, she said. I know. Does that mean I should have hugged her? No. What if she really is sorry? She may be sorry that she lost you. That's not the same as being sorry for what she did. No. Eden pulled the seatbelt across her chest. Can I miss her and still not see her? Yes. Isn't that punishing her? Missing someone does not mean returning their permission to hurt you. She clicked the buckle into place. I might want to see her again later. Then you can decide later. I did not tell her family was family. Family had been the word my parents used whenever they wanted access, without accountability. By March, the bent plaque had been repaired enough to make it safe without removing the marks from the fall. A metal worker straightened the folded corner and sealed the surface against weather. Eden asked him not to polish away every scratch. She did not want the plaque returned to pine glass. The upper platform remained closed, while the resort completed structural work and negotiated the next phase of the site. Even if it reopened, Eden did not want Nolan's name placed where cameras, sponsors, and commercial packages had already changed its meaning. She chose a small garden beside the community library. Nolan had once held free map reading sessions there on rainy Saturdays. The garden had a curved path, native grasses, and 3 wooden benches beneath cottonwood trees. Children could reach it from the library without paying an entrance fee or joining a program. There was no stage when we placed the plaque. No sponsor wall, no live stream. No shirts, cups, or journals for sale. Miriam brought the plaque in its padded case. Daniel carried a simple wooden post built by volunteers. 2 library employees helped secure it beside the path at the height Eden selected. Only the people needed to install it attended. Eden stood for part of the process and sat when her pelvis began to ache. Nolan's private letter remained in her bedroom. No line from it appeared on the plaque. No one asked to read it aloud. The first restored quiet hour began the following Saturday. 9 children attended with parents or guardians. Some had lost family members. Others had experienced changes they did not want to explain. Daniel welcomed them at the edge of the garden. He did not ask anyone to introduce themselves by describing their grief. Phones were placed in a padded storage box. Cameras stayed in their cases. The children chose where to sit. 1 took a bench. 2 settled beneath a tree. A boy remained beside his mother for the entire hour. No one told him independence was the goal. Eden brought Nolan's film camera. She kept the lens cap on. I stood far enough away that the children did not have to perform for me, and close enough to help if Eden asked. I was not the director. I did not explain what the hour meant. For 60 minutes, no one spoke unless they chose to. Wind moved through the dry grass. A bird landed on the repaired plaque and flew away. When the hour ended, Daniel opened the phone box. The children stood in their own time. One girl showed Eden a pine cone she had found. A boy asked whether the quiet hour would happen again. Eden told him yes, but she did not ask what he had thought about while sitting alone. After everyone had begun walking back toward the library, Eden removed the lens cap from her camera. She looked at the plaque, the empty benches, and the path where the children had been allowed to leave without telling us what the silence had given them. Then she chose her frame and pressed the shutter. My father's name was still there, but for the first time since he died, no one was wearing it like a logo.